Hello, and welcome. I am Chilling Tales. And as you get ready for bed, you must know that you are doing amazing and you deserve all the sleep you can get. So as you are winding down, let me know where you are from and what time you are watching this video. Like and subscribe to help the channel if you'd like. Now put your mind at ease and let the story unfold. They called it the Grey Hollow Beast, though no one would admit to being the first to say it out loud. It lived, they said, where the ridge folded in on itself, and the wind forgot its route down in the bottom of the creek bed, where water pooled black and pines grew in a ring, like parishioners refusing to sit. If you stood at the edge of the trees at dusk, you could smell it, not rot exactly, but the thick iron sweetness that comes from a butcher block, wiped clean, but never clean enough. If you camped there, you woke with your boots moved 6 inches closer to the river and a paw print pressed into the mud where your face had been. Hunters sometimes came back with a story about a buck torn in a way no cat or coyote could manage. Teenagers came back with matching scars on their shoulders they said were from brambles. Some people didn't come back at all. It was a story I'd grown up with and a story I'd outgrown. Then my father died, and the ridge stopped being a place for legends and became a place where the world might stop talking for long enough that I could hear myself breathe. I walked out the day after the funeral with a pack and a canteen and the knife he used to take trout out of the river with kindness. The house was full of casseroles and advice. I wanted neither. The old men in town said, "Don't go down the hollow after dark." The old women in town didn't say anything at all, which meant they had opinions you weren't owed. My ex sent a text with a prayer hands emoji she would never use in person. I turned the phone off and stuck it at the bottom of my bag so its blank face wouldn't catch my eye and ask for promises. Past the last mailbox, the road turned to gravel, then to 2 ruts with grass in the middle. Pines leaned in like eavesdroppers. The hollow took sound the way quilts take heat. By the time the sun slipped behind the ridge and the cicadas started their idiot chorus, it felt like I was standing inside someone else's breath. I wasn't planning to sleep there. I wanted to stand in a dark that wasn't full of picture frames and sweaters that still held my father's shape, and then walk back with my head in one piece. Instead, I found a cabin where no map said a cabin should be. It sat down in the fold like a knot in a rope, boards gone silver, roof furry with moss, porch peeled down to splinters where feet used to learn the house's rhythm. No path, no chimney smoke, no signs of anybody except the lock on the front latch was new and bright as a coin. Someone had put money here. That was the first thing that scared me. The second was the symbol carved deep into the door, a circle made of short slash lines, jagged as if a child had tried to draw a sun from a memory that hurt. When I touched it with the tips of 2 fingers, it felt warmer than the wood around it, as if the day had sunk into it and decided to stay. The hollow went quiet between one heartbeat and the next. The cricket song cut off mid-word. The breeze that had been sorting needles through branches forgot to move. Even the creek behind me made a listening shape. I put the flat of my hand against the door and felt something like a hum, not electrical, not mechanical, the low, steady insistence you feel in your ribs when someone bigger than you is also in the room. That was when the first growl came, so deep I felt it before I heard it. Not far off, not other side of the clearing, right where the trees start. I turned and saw eyes, pale gray, rimmed red, set in a head that could have been a dog's if a dog had been left in a room with knives and had learned everything it could from the shapes they made. The body that followed the eyes was wrong, long in the forearm, hunched in the shoulder, matted fur slick with whatever eats blood for breakfast. It moved like it had never forgotten how to walk on 2 legs and resented being made to remember 4. Its gaze slid over me like a hand over a side of meat. There was nothing hungry in it. Hunger is honest. This was the patience of a butcher between customers. It came at me so fast my brain didn't have time to choose. My hand did. I yanked the latch. The door gave. I fell backward, slammed it behind me, and heard claws sketch the wood with the scream of enamel on plate. Inside smelled like iron filings and wet fur. The dark was the thick dark of a place that has been keeping a secret for a long time and has decided to go on keeping it in your presence. I got my light out with fingers that didn't want to obey and saw chains bolted into the walls at ankle height and wrist height and throat height, hooks in the rafters, a table with knives laid out in rows, blades honed down to hisses. On the table, a ledger-sized book open to a page with lines of careful handwriting that started precise and ended like someone writing in a moving car. The top of the page said, "I keep the circle." Below that, "The beast is not one. It is the many that can be one. It wears whoever meets its eyes too long. It speaks in voices that know what you love. It can be held by iron and intention, but not forever. If I fail, it takes me. If you are reading this, I have failed, or I am outside and busy failing. Lock the door. Do not answer if it uses a voice you know. Choose a knife that knows more than you. Sit in a corner where you can see both windows and pretend that makes you safe." I read it twice because the door shuddered twice, and the mind does what it can when it can't do anything useful. A claw found the latch through the gap where I'd not got it home, and rattled it like a man who refuses to admit he should go away. The wood groaned. The carved circle in the door seemed to warm under my palm. Then the scraping stopped. Silence went on long enough to start doing harm, and then a voice came through the wood. "Son, open up. It's me." My father's voice, with the last 3 months of cigarettes it had held, and the last 3 weeks of morphine it had pretended not to want. He'd been in the ground exactly a day. I'd probably still had dirt under my fingernails. "Please," he said, "you don't have to be afraid. It's a stupid old story. It's only me." I swallowed. I made my mouth into a straight line and tucked it in. I looked down at the page. Someone had underlined "Do not answer" and scrawled beneath it, "Even if you're polite." "You always were a hard one," the voice said in a different tone, amused, as if it had remembered a joke it could use later. Then it laughed. The laugh was what happens when you put 2 incompatible substances in a pan and stir hard foam and black and things that never belong together. I sat in the corner with a knife that had white scarring along its spine and a grip worn down by a hand that had been holding more than wood, and I did what the book told me to do. I did nothing for as long as I could. The thing outside circled the cabin until the sky paled. Its claws ticked on wood and dragged on stone. Its breathing proved the size of its lungs. Sometimes it wept like a drunk on a porch. Sometimes it said my name, the way my ex says it when she's telling a story about me that has a punchline. Sometimes nothing at all, which was the worst, because you can't hold yourself rigid against a laugh or a name indefinitely. You fail somewhere. You fall asleep in a corner and wake with your head listing against a wall and the knife still in your hand. When the gray behind the trees turned into real morning, it went quiet with the satisfaction of a worker putting his tools down. I waited. I counted to the number that used to get me as a child, from here to the end of the block, back when I believed in bargains made with telephone poles and cracks. I got up when the light through the dirty windows went from soured milk to polite. I opened the door with the knife held stupidly because knives don't make a difference when a story has decided to be true. No tracks, no fur snagged on a splinter, no claw marks in the porch except the ones on the door. Those the night had deepened and neatened, little slashes that had been scratches now becoming part of that carved circle, their angles righted, their lengths matched, like a kid who can't stand an unfinished drawing. I should have left then. If I'd been the person I had been a year ago, I would have walked out of the hollow using the same steps I'd used to get in. Grief makes you forget what you know. The hollow makes you learn what you wish you didn't. I took 2 hours in daylight to try every direction, north, The ridge gave itself up to bracken and tiny white mushrooms, and loops back to the clearing. South, the creek got wider, and then narrower, and then the same, and then the same again. East ended in a stand of young pines with identical scars at exactly the same height, as if something had paced them once and decided to count. West was a rabbit path that stayed a rabbit path and got bored of being one and dumped me into the hollow again, where the cabin waited like a laundry basket you'd been pretending not to see. The book had another page. It looked like someone had come back from doing something that let their wrists return to their hands and had sat while the adrenaline decided if it would leave. Iron restrains, salt confuses, chalk remembers, but only if you choose to stay inside. Do not chase. Do not try to cut anything that wears a familiar mouth. Gateways in this place do not open to roads. They open to repetitions. The beast runs the spiral the way water runs the sink. Survive 3 nights, and the circle closes. It will go on. You may leave. If you survive, you will not leave unchanged. Keep your eyes. Keep your voice. If they call your name after, do not answer unless you can count your breaths while you do it. My father had taught me to count my breaths in other rooms, emergency rooms, courtrooms, living rooms where he was going to say something that would go wrong and needed me to keep my face soft. The words in the book felt exactly like the thing he would have said, except written by a person who had been fighting a wolf with a history degree. I took inventory. The cabin had a pump in the corner that brought up water like a throat brings up the last of a bad dream. A cupboard with 3 tins that had labels bleached down to nouns: beans, salt, matches, a nail keg with nails different enough to tell you a man had picked them up from more than one place. No bed, a single chair, the corner where I could see both windows. The second night the beast arrived before the light finished failing. Its shadow went past the window in a way that made the dirt on the glass stand up, as if dust could hum. In the lamplight its fur looked not brown or gray, but the color of old locks. Its back bristled where a back shouldn't. When it turned its head and looked in, the eyes were not lanterns, they were coins, cold and flat and expensive. It spoke in my voice, not through the door, inside my ear, as if there had always been a tunnel from the hollow back to the place behind my eyes. You don't have to make this hard, I told myself, using me on me the way you use a tool instead of a fist. Let it in. Wear me. Stop trying so hard to be the only thing keeping something in place. Teeth help. I pressed my palms to the table and felt the grain as if it were a relief map of a country that had survived both kinds of war, guns and old grudges. The knives on the table vibrated, not from any wind. My reflection in the dark window grinned when I didn't. I had nothing to fight with except choosing to sit, so I chose to sit. The beast tried new tones. It tried my ex, soft, saying the thing you want people to say when you've lost someone and they are tired of saying sorry. It tried Tamsin, laughing like a friend. It tried my boss, angry. It tried the old woman who ran the bait shop and had never said 3 words to me. The circle on the door warmed under my hand. Somewhere outside, something small startled and ran in a shape that a fox would have liked to follow. Toward morning it went quiet. I slept the way people do in chairs when they're keeping vigil. 2 minutes, a minute. The space between breaths you can hold if you're not trying to impress anyone. The 3rd day I stayed inside. The book said you could go out, and the trees would bring you back. It didn't say you couldn't leave yourself in little pieces along the way like breadcrumbs and come back emptier each time. I ate beans cold and drank pump water that tasted like pennies and iron and counted to numbers I hadn't used since catechism. The 3rd night it howled. The first 2 nights it had been gracelessly hungry. This time it announced. The sound went up the ridge and came back wrong, as if the hollow were a bell with a crack in it. The chain on the wall pulled tight though nothing had gone into it. The hooks overhead trembled with the confidence of old mistakes. Open, my father said through the door, gentle, the way he had when I was 10 and had locked myself in the bathroom and decided I could live there if I had to. Son, please. The latch leaned. The door swelled. The carved circle deepened a shade darker, as if blood had chosen to move where it was most useful. I slid down the wood with my spine and put my shoulders into it and felt the bulk on the other side, press back the way oceans press. The book on the table had a last page I'd ignored because it felt like a man talking to himself, and now it felt like a man talking to me. If you have no silver, use names. If you have no names, use counting. If you cannot count, use pain. If you cannot feel pain, you have already opened the door. I put the point of the knife into the soft pad at the base of my thumb and shoved, not enough to maim, enough to make my ribs take a breath. My mouth had forgotten it could ask for. Blood came bright and annoyed. I smeared it across the carved circle, without thinking, but with all the intention of a person who has run out of options and is willing to pretend that makes a plan. The latch popped. The door opened a finger's width. A claw came through, black, curved, jointed wrong. It hooked under the latch and tugged like a man tugging loose a nail that had always belonged to him. I brought the knife down on the circle because it was a target, and because I wanted something to happen, and because sometimes breaking a thing is the only way to stop having to carry it. The knife bit wood, not deep, enough. The circle broke. Light poured out of the door, the way breath pours out of a man who finally admits he is tired. Not daylight, not fire, silver, so clean it made the dirt of the room ashamed. The claw jerked back with a sound that would have been a word if it had had the right mouth. My father screamed, and then I screamed, and then something with too many voices screamed us both, quiet. Then quiet for real, the kind where you can hear the spiders working in the rafters. I sat for a long time with my back against the busted circle and my eyes blurry with the from the inside of your head kind of tears. When I could stand without feeling like a stopped clock, I pushed the door with my foot. It swung on its new, wrong radius. The claw marks were gone. The circle was a black smear like a handprint, ash flaking as if an old poster had finally given up. Outside, the hollow looked like it always had. Needles, mud, a wash of gray. The air moved again. A bird insulted me from a branch. The creek remembered it had appointments downstream. When I stepped off the porch, the ground didn't try to persuade me to change my mind. The trail out wasn't a trail so much as the opposite of being lost. Trees that had been leaning in leaned back. The ridge lifted its shoulder and let me go. It was noon by the time the last of the pines gave me up to the dirt road and the power lines and the world that likes to have names on things. People said I'd been gone a day. People said I'd been gone 3. The old men clucked. The old women gave me a look that had a chair in it if I wanted to sit. My ex called from a number I didn't answer and left a voicemail that started with "hey" and ended with not quite a sob. Tamsin came by with soup she'd made and forgotten to salt, and stayed on the porch because she said her reflection in my front window was doing things she didn't approve of. I told her to bring salt next time, and a roll of tape and a nail. I put iron in the house, not superstitious iron, actual chain across the back door's bottom to make the fit true. Bar stock screwed into the kitchen table's underside so it would stop rocking and start holding. A pair of steel washers hung on red thread in the window that faces the river because washers were what I could afford, and red was what my grandmother would have used to tell a thing. No. I chalked a circle on the threshold and then swept it carefully away because the book had said chalk remembers, and I wanted it to remember the act, not the geometry. The hollow didn't let me leave without rent. I don't mean a scar I can show you or a sleep I stopped having. I mean that once a week, or twice, When the wind comes down from the ridge carrying the smell of pennies and rain, something in it says my name exactly the way my father said it on the day he taught me to drive. Gentle, patient, ready to catch. I don't answer then. I fold a dish towel in half and in half again and place it over the bathroom mirror, not because of any old stories, but because glass is persuasive and I am tired. I count my breaths to 13, the number of trees across from the funeral home, the steps to the river from our old porch, the reasons I can think of in a hurry for not giving up what I worked so hard to keep. Once, walking past the feed store, I saw a man bending to tie his shoe in the window. The man in the glass looked up before he did and showed me a mouth that wasn't his. I took a promise out of my pocket and held it up between me and any more mischief. The glass went back to being a window with dust and thumbprints and blue sky. The man finished his knot and stood and thanked me for holding the door, though I hadn't. Twice now I've woken to the sound of water running, the sink on, a skinny thread. Both times there were words written on the fog of the mirror, where a face would be if I were brave enough to look. Come back. Both times I wiped them away with the heel of my hand and said aloud, no, not loudly, not prayerfully, just like you say no to a dog that is about to learn a bad habit and will be better for not knowing it. When the moon is thin and mean the town locks its screens by accident, men sit on porches with their feet flat and their hands still. Women who have decided they'll never marry watch the edge of the trees and make soup that smells like saving. Kids who don't believe a word we say walk as far as the last mailbox and no farther, and we pretend not to see that a part of them believes more than is good for them. I know the cabin is still there. Sometimes I smell the iron of it under the moss. Sometimes I feel the shape of the carved circle in my palm when I pick up my keys. Sometimes, passing the ridge with the windows up, I catch a glint through trees that could be the face of a knife catching sun and could be nothing at all. I don't go back. I keep a nail and a length of red thread and the knife with the white scarring along its spine in the drawer by the stove. If guests ask what the iron washers in the window are for, I tell them they keep the glass from buzzing when trucks go by, and this is mostly true. If anyone says the gray hollow beast like they think it is a sound to bring to a fire pit, I get up and go make coffee and count to 13 while the kettle tries to be patient. On good nights, people, I love say my name and mean me. On bad nights, the hollow says it and means a door. On those nights, I say nothing, and the wind carries on downriver. Disappointed, and the pine needles remember their manners, and whatever is looking for a familiar mouth goes to the next town that has almost forgotten one of its buildings and will learn again not to. Now, on to the next story. I didn't notice the missing mirrors until I'd been in the apartment a week. Sublets in this city come like hasty apologies. Too quick, a little insulting, and you take them anyway because you need them. A friend of a friend needed 3 months overseas, and I needed a place where my ex wouldn't know to knock. 12th floor, pre-war bones, good light, bad heat. I lugged 2 suitcases and a sewing machine up the narrow stairs because the elevator enjoys deciding, and told myself I could make anywhere livable if it had a table. I'm a tailor, nights mostly. People don't think they need clothes fixed until the evening an event eats them. I've hemmed prom dresses at midnight over a bathtub. I've stitched a tuxedo shoulder while a man repeated his vows into a hairbrush so he could get the tremble right. It's honest work and it keeps me near the hum of the city after hours. I like the hum. It sounds like survival. The apartment was furnished, IKEA pretending to be older than it is. A scratched oak table that had real weight when you leaned on it. Long windows facing the river that the air insisted still existed under the fog. What it didn't have, I realized on the 4th evening when I tried to check whether my eyeliner made me look like I'd slept, was a mirror, not in the bathroom, not behind the bedroom door, not the cheap courtesy square in the front hall most landlords leave. I laughed and propped my phone against a mug and practiced compromises. On the sixth night, a note slid under my door. We haven't met. Midnight fittings at Nocturne, if you still do house calls. Cash, Nocturne, was one of those clubs that look like wealth leaned against a wall and decided to take up smoking. Black door, silent doorman, the name in script you had to already know how to read. I'd never been inside. I'd hemmed two dresses on the sidewalk while a girl with an ankle tattoo cried with gratitude and handed me money like it was a secret. I texted the number at the bottom of the note and got an address with no apology for the hour. I packed my kit: chalk, needles, two sizes of shears, tape measure, leather thimble that fits only my ring finger, a handful of safety pins, because panic wants what it already understands. At 11:45, I stepped into a night that had practiced being colder and took a bus that argued with its own headlights. Nocturne's door opened as I approached, as if it had been waiting specifically for my footsteps to answer. The doorman nodded like we had a story between us and led me past a velvet rope that might as well have been a border. Inside, the air was money and mistake. The bar lights were low enough to keep people beautiful. The mirrors behind the bottles had been replaced by black glass. "Why?" I said to the bartender, because not saying names is a kind of refusal. He flicked his gaze toward the stairs and returned to polishing a glass he had already polished. I climbed. The upstairs rooms sat like ideas about privacy: curtains instead of doors, sofas that had seen restraint, a hallway runner that pretended it had never met a heel. At the end, a room with a closed door and taped on it neatly a strip of card that read "Why." I knocked. "Enter," a voice said. Not loud, not theatrical, tired and better at hiding it than most. Why was a woman in a black dress that had been stitched by someone who thought seams should be felt. Pale, not the anemic kind, more the expensive sort, like paper made from linen, hair too dark to be natural at her age, but no lines around her mouth to tell you the age. She held herself like a person who has practiced not needing chairs. "The straps," she said, gesturing without looking at herself. "They fall. My tailor is indisposed." "I'm your tailor," I said, "because if you save people from embarrassment at midnight, they belong to you a little." "Tonight," she said. I measured. She stood still with a patience I don't get from most human beings. Skin cool, under the tape measure, perfume like old rain. When I pricked my finger and swore softly, everyone swears, but I apologize for it. Her eyes flicked to the dot of blood like a cat noticing a laser pointer. I put my finger in my mouth the way a child learns to. She smiled, not with kindness, and glanced away. "Do you always work at night?" she asked while I pinned. "Nights are when people figure out the fit was hope and not measurement." "Ah," she said, "clothes and lives, both." When I finished, she handed me twice what we'd agreed. "Tonight again," she said, neither question nor command, and I said, against the part of my better sense that lives in my hands, "Text me." She didn't. She sent another card under my door. The handwriting was printed, careful, the sort a schoolteacher drills into children who want to grow messy. The second note asked for shortening a coat. The third asked for the impossible: add fabric to a vintage dress. I told her vintage is never truly vintage. Anything that survived did so because it learned to stretch. She laughed without sound and poured me a drink I pretended to sip. When the club closed, she walked me out. It was nearly dawn. Nocturne's door pushed me into a street gray enough to erase faces. The doorman was gone. The light above the door had been blackened from the inside. The city in early morning reminded me of my ex's apartment after the last box leaves, edges and dust. "Do you live nearby?" I asked, because I am not above needing details to keep people real. "Close enough," she said. The hand she lifted to tuck her hair back underlined the presence of veins. The blue there glowed slightly, Or maybe the streetlight insisted on finding something to illuminate. You're good, she added. You don't waste movement. My teacher broke sticks over my wrists when I was 12. I said deadpan. Taught me economy. She tilted her head, pleased or pitying. I couldn't tell. Will you come tomorrow? She asked. Where? Home, she said, as if that were a shape the night could hold. The address she texted the next day was mine. I stared at my phone until the rattle in my walls, which has a schedule I pretend not to know, shook a memory loose. The first night I'd moved in, I'd found a box of nails under the sink that had been sorted by size with the care of moral certainty. The second night I'd found a drawer empty behind the stove, too clean, too intentional. The third night I discovered, when I ran my hand along the back of the bedroom closet, a panel that came away under my palm, not like a secret door, but like a direction the wall had been meaning to go. Are you downstairs? I texted. Yes, she replied. Do you live under me? Above, she wrote, and below. I opened my door. The hallway was empty the way a throat is empty between words. I looked both directions, because if you don't check, you'll be the person who tells the at last story wrong. A card slipped under my door while I had it open, cunning as a small animal. I bent to pick it up. Bring a full-length mirror, it said in that careful hand. If you have one. I thought about laughing and found I didn't know how to. I went hunting through thrift stores anyway that afternoon, asking for something every storekeeper told me they never got anymore. People keep mirrors, a woman behind a counter told me over a cup of coffee that costs $2 in a city that considers that price antique. Or they break them where they stand. Bad luck follows movers. Or, she lowered her voice like a choir, someone's buying them up. In the end, I settled for a wardrobe door with a beveled glass set into it. It took two of us to carry it up the stairs. I tipped the other person more than I had, because the weight of glass makes me grateful. At midnight, the card came again. Now, I set the wardrobe door against my wall and opened my apartment door. The hallway smelled like rain and varnish. The scent stair rails release when they decide to admit they were once trees. I stood, stupid, holding the edge of the door with one hand and my sewing kit in the other, the mirror standing in my doorway like an extra person at a party. Well, I said to no one. The mirror moved, not slid, not pushed. The glass wavered like heat rises. I saw my face and then behind my left shoulder, wise. The hallway behind me reflected empty. The glass insisted otherwise. Y lifted a finger to her lips. I stepped sideways because I have the habit of obeying the improbable when it's polite. She stepped out of the mirror. She didn't disturb the surface. She simply existed where she hadn't been, and the air rearranged itself around her with that faint electric feeling you get when you stand too close to a working transformer. Up close, in daylight, or the nearest thing to it, the city allows, the veins at her wrist shone like lines in a map to a country that shouldn't exist. You want me to sew inside that? I said, nodding, because if my mouth opened any wider, I wasn't sure what would come out. Not tonight, she said. Tonight I need help. Help is more expensive, I said, because reflexes save you from panic. She smiled with something like fondness. How much to carry a mirror downstairs? Depends if it tries to talk. It won't, she said. It's tired. We carried the wardrobe door down one flight. On the landing outside 11B, where the rail knits itself, a mark darkened the paint. Something had leaned there often enough to make the wall learn. We set the mirror there. What is this? I asked. A door, she said simply, that's been very patient. It was a mirror. My face, hers, a faint diffusion of the stairwell, all there. As I watched, the area that reflected the opposite landing went odd, the way a puddle in a hot street shakes. Pew put her palm flat to the glass. The only time I had seen a hand so pale touch something that gently was in my ex's grandmother's kitchen, where she would pat dough down as if she were apologizing. I reached up and put my hand next to hers. The glass was cool and mildly electric. It ticked under my palm like a clock. "Who's buying up the mirrors?" I asked, not because I thought the answer would help, but because words keep your mouth from asking worse questions. "We are," she said, "all of us. It's becoming difficult to find reflections that don't belong to other people." "Why?" "Because," she said, and the tick under my hand became a hume. "Doors close when they're told to. We tell them not to. The glass fogged under our hands, the way your breath fogs it when you are 12 and writing a name with your finger at a slumber party, and then cleared. The stairwell reflected back wrong. The shadows on the opposite landing slouched where no shadow should be. The banister's brass wore a scar it doesn't. Something moved on the other side, slow, patient, close to the ground, as if its knuckles dragged. Don't open, Y said under her breath. I don't open doors when someone tells me not to, I said, watching the other stairwell door blur between states. On our side, the building sighed, the long contented exhale of a radiator that remembers summer. On the other, a hand skittered onto the landing, not a hand. The idea of one, too many joints. The glass cooled abruptly. Who's that? I whispered. A debt, Y said. From before they named this place, we keep it out, some of us better than others. You're, I started, then stopped because there are words you don't say when a mirror is listening. Husbandry, she said dryly. Call it that. Of the night, of hungers, of doors. Pick the one that lets you sleep. The shape on the other landing retreated. The brass in the reflection lost its scar. The fog under our hands dissipated in a final delicate lace. Y lifted her palm. She had no print. The mirror held an after image of the both of us for a few seconds and then obeyed light again. How many mirrors do you need? I asked, useless and honest. As many as we can manage, she said. We seed them in places we live. We keep the day wearies and the night out. Sometimes, lately, the day wants the night too much and comes looking in glass. You said you needed help, I said. I do, she said, and did not look at me. She led me to her apartment, not above, not below, exactly. A quarter turn of hallways, and we were in a room with no windows and a smell like stone after rain. The walls were hung with empty frames, gilt, wood, metal ornate as bad jewelry. Inside each, black glass, not painted over mirrors, not televisions. The first thing you learn working with thread is that different darknesses have different weights. This darkness had texture. It ate your gaze first, and then your certainty. Trouser hems, she said trivially, holding up a pair of men's pants. He'll be here at 1, 17 and a quarter on the right. Left is a hair off. Why me? I asked, reaching for chalk and grateful that my hands know what to do while my mind rearranges. Because you work without looking, she said. And because mirrors don't like you, everyone else's breath fogs them. You leave nothing. Rude, I said, but my belly knew what she meant. My ex used to complain that selfies made me look like a stranger. Not bad, not false, just lagging, like an accent from a home I never had. Which watched me measure and fold, pin and double check. Who taught you to work by touch? My grandmother, I said. She used to sew with a cigarette in her mouth and never drop ash. Did she tell you that in some houses, mirrors go to sleep? She told me in some houses, they dream. He arrived at 0106, not a he I would have expected, not a banker or a bully or a man with a day job that wants to be knight. A boy, really, late 20s at most, tense shoulders that didn't know how to be beautiful yet, eyes that would be tired if they weren't too busy being eager. He didn't cross into the room. He stood just outside the line of its door frame. Ma'am, he said to Y, and he said ma'am, like he'd grown up in a house with 2 sets of rules and was trying not to break either. He handed me his trousers with a gentleness I reserve for childhood toys. You're the tailor. I am, I said, and knelt to mark his cuff. His calves were strong in the way men get when they run at night. The chalk slid. I steadied. The hum behind the black glass stuttered, then steadied again, like a song the building and Y could both remember. "Do you have mirrors in your apartment?" I asked, not looking up. It's easier to ask intrusive questions when the person thinks you are counting. "Two," he said. Y sucked her teeth softly. "We took the rest," she said to me. To him she only lowered her voice. "You promised." "Two to see if I'm dead," he said, wry. To me, "Sometimes you need to know if you're there. It helps with stares." "Mirrors lie," Y said, and for the first time her voice sounded like hunger. He left at 01:19. The hem would be ready at 2. My hands are honest. Y set the trousers aside and stared at the black glass on the wall as if it were an old friend trying to outstare her. "We keep the worst out," she said flatly. "Most nights. Some nights it comes as light. You wouldn't like those." "I would if I had to," I said, which is the sort of thing a person says when they have never had to live up to it. "You would," she said, and it didn't feel like praise. On my way home, I carried the wardrobe mirror back up to 12. My thighs burned. On the landing, someone had finger-drawn a small symbol in the dust, a circle with a notch like an open mouth. I wiped it with my sleeve without meaning to, and felt the hallway exhale gently in relief. In my apartment, I set the mirror against a wall and covered it with a sheet. The city practiced fog at dawn. Somewhere downriver, a ferry blew its horn in a tone that wanted to be a key. In the glass under the sheet, something ticked. I didn't sleep. I stitched. The hem came out clean. The next night, I delivered it, and the boy's gratitude was so unguarded, I had to look away. Y didn't smile. She rested one hand on the black glass, and the black glass vibrated, cat-like, under her palm. After that, it got worse. Word travels where it shouldn't. Calls in the small hours for hems and bustles, and a seam pressed open and re-sewn on a wedding dress that didn't want to admit it had belonged to someone else's body. People asked for me by name when they had no reason to. Notes with Y's careful hand slid under my door when she hadn't sent them. I caught my own face in the wardrobe mirror at odd times, slightly off from me, as if my reflection had arrived late to a conversation and was trying to catch up. The city's thrift stores ran dry of mirrors, Craigslist filled with pleas, looking for full-length moving sale, good condition, no replies. The club changed its name on the awning every week, and the doorman changed his hat. Inside, the black glass grew heavier, the frames warped like wood under pressure. "Why me?" I asked Y, one night when I'd put my hands into too many strangers' waistbands without permission and needed to test if I could still hear my own questions. "Because you don't open," she said. "At the door, in the glass, wherever you first learned the word no." "Who's calling?" I asked. "The city," she said, "or what used to be under it, or us when we're hungry for the wrong time." The last thing happened on a Thursday just shy of dawn. My phone alarm had the small, exhausted sound it gets after a week of nights. The wardrobe mirror ticked under its sheet. Someone knocked on my door, not polite, exact. I put 2 fingers against the wood below the peephole and felt no pressure. I looked to the hall, empty. "Taylor," a voice said softly. Not Wise, not the boys, not my exes, not anyone who'd ever paid me money. My name, but handled like silk. "I need you." I went cold in the way you do when your body decides the blood has better use elsewhere. "No appointments," I said kindly. Kindness buys time. "Leave a note. It's an emergency." The voice had patience. "The seam split." "Where?" "In the mirror," the voice said, and the wardrobe glass ticked loud and small, like a fingernail on a bottle. I lifted the sheet. My reflection looked back. Tired, competent, someone who never takes off her thimble even when she sleeps. Behind my left shoulder, a second room, not mine, taller, older, The kind of plaster you only see in photos of apartments that don't go on the market. A woman stood there, pale dress, no seams, hair pinned at the nape in a way that would force your neck to behave. She held herself like a person who had always been the person other people came to, saying emergency and then waited for orders. The seam, she said, and her mouth hardly moved. It's in the back, I can't reach. I don't do house calls across, I began, and realized how broken a sentence can be. I'm not asking you to come through, she said. I'm asking you to stitch what you can see. There's a stitch, if you sew long enough, that you can do blind. You feel the edge with your ring finger through cloth and make 2 turns, and the thread holds like a promise. I threaded my smallest needle and put my hand flat to the glass. Cool. Y had taught me the trick of pressure. I pressed. The glass hummed. The other room's light sharpened. The seam at the back of the woman's dress gaped. Not fabric, something more like shadow. Through it you could see nothing. Not skin, not more dress. An absence that moved like breath. You shouldn't be held by that, I said before I could decide on carelessness or care. No one should, she said. I set the needle to the glass. It met resistance and then slid, as if I had pushed it through a thin sheet of ice. The thread followed reluctantly, skeptical, then obedient. I used the blind stitch in the rhythm of my grandmother's cigarette smoke, in the memory of a boy's grateful eyes, in the shape of Y's hand pressing black glass to cat's purr. The seam drew closed, grudging but honest. On the last pass, the wardrobe mirror shook once, the way a person shakes when they have decided to stop asking if they are alive and accept it. Done, I said, breathless and ashamed that I was. The woman turned. Her mouth did not smile. Her eyes did, a blank humor like winter light on a frozen river. Send Y my regards, she said, which I did not like. And you? What? Move the mirror, she said, before night. Where? Against an inside wall, she said patiently, as if speaking to a child, so that when the day comes looking in glass, it hits drywall and remembers itself. The wardrobe mirror ticked again, once, sharply, in the glass behind my reflection, the seam held. The other room's plaster shed a little dust. The woman lifted a hand, and the lights in my apartment flickered because the building is too old not to eavesdrop. Then the other room dimmed. The glass showed only me and the sheet in my other hand. I lean the mirror against the inside wall now. I keep it covered except when I need to ask whether my face belongs to me. Nocturne changes its name and stays open. Ye sends notes and sometimes doesn't. And sometimes I carry a mirror down one flight while the stair rails varnish, whispers old sap stories. The boy runs at night and brings me trousers that smell like rain. The thrift stores refill with picture frames and never mirrors. Sometimes people knock. I let some in. Not at midnight. Not when the mirror ticks. I do hems by feel and teach fingers the blind stitch and say no to doors that ask nicely. And when the city breathes onto the glass with the hunger of morning and asks if it can come in brighter than night ever is, the wardrobe mirror stays against the inside wall, stubborn as a good seam. I put my hand flat to its covered face until the ticking eases, and the room I live in, rented, narrow, real, remembers to reflect only what it can hold. Now, on to the next story. I was the only one left on the platform when the station decided to remember me. Greystone is small as stations go, 2 tracks, a brick building with a slate roof that leaks in March, a clock that gains 3 minutes a week no matter what the handyman swears he did. After the last scheduled departure, 11:45 eastbound, the train people swear by and the rest of the town ignores. The platforms go to sleep like anything else. The vending machines hum. The pigeons find their beams. The clerk in the booth lowers the metal shutter with a finality that wants to be a kindness. I should have left when he did. My duffel was heavy with the life I couldn't afford, and I was tired in the way that feels like rust has decided it is you now. But I didn't have the money for a cab, and I didn't want to go back to the apartment whose walls had learned my fights. It was colder under the canopy than it should have been for October. The air had that metallic tang city nights get when rain has recently argued with stone. I kept my hands in my pockets so my fingers wouldn't remember what they were for. The station emptied by increments. A janitor pushed a yellow cart and did not meet my eye. A couple argued in low voices until their words frayed, and they went outside to finish doing that somewhere less acoustic. An old man slept with his head back and his mouth open until the guard shook him gently and pointed him toward the taxi rank. The clock read 12:03, then 12:11, then I stopped looking. The rails began to sing. You can feel trains before you see them if you give your attention to the right place. The metal takes the news first, and then the air. I felt the hum in my shoes, and then behind my ribs, the faintest pressure, like an elevator works on your organs. The light at the far end of the platform did not turn green. No announcement belled. No headlamp wrote a promise into the dark. A wind moved along the tracks. Not a gust, not weather, an exhale with a destination. It brought with it the smell of dry iron and something like water left too long in a flower vase. A shape detached itself from the night and became a train without the courtesy of headlights. It came in soft, as if it were trying not to wake anyone, as if stealth were kindness. The cars were old, not modern, sleek, but not the kind of venerable red you take your grandchildren to at the holiday festival either. Smooth-sided, windowed, forgettable, a stripe of paint along the middle that might have been blue or green in better light. It slowed at my portion of platform with the practiced efficiency of a habit. The doors sighed like tired lungs and parted. If you've never stepped into a room with the exact temperature of a morgue drawer, you don't know the kind of cold this was. Not winter cold, absence cold. What light there was came from nowhere, a grayness that should have had a source, and did not. The aisle ran down the center of the car, upholstered seats in pairs faced forward. The windows showed me my own uncertainty and a smear of my own breath. There were people sitting. That was the first relief. None of them moved. That was the second realization. I stood just inside the door with my duffel at my ankle and told myself I was going to step back out, wait on the platform for a train that had headlights like an honest machine. The doors snicked shut as if they were tired of hearing me lie to myself. The car jolted, the station slid away, the world beyond the windows forgot to exist. "Ticket," said a voice soft as paper. He sat near the door, the kind of man photographs in old books call a commuter, suit bagging a little at the knees, tie too narrow, hat in his lap with a sweatband gone dark. His eyes were open. They were not certain who they belonged to. His hand came up slow, palm out, a ritual more than a request. I dug for my wallet before it occurred to me that there would be no scanner here, no place to tap a phone or a card that is trying to be won. "I missed the last one," I said. The clerk said. The farther end of the car answered, "Leave him." A woman sat by the window 3 rows down. She had long black hair that looked like it had been brushed recently by hands that knew how, a dress that belonged to 3 styles ago and none, and the kind of posture you hold when sitting has become a job. "He's new," she added, as if that explained anything. The man with the hat sighed his breath out and folded his hand back into his lap. He did not blink. No one else did either, and that was the moment I placed the wrongness. The car was full of people who were not breathing like I was. The woman crooked 2 fingers. "Sit," she said, "before he comes." I have been told I obey too readily, when instruction feels like a rope thrown into water. I sat opposite her because her eyes did not look like tacks. Up close I could see that her dress had been mended neatly at the seam, under her arm. Her left knuckle had a white scar where a ring had once rubbed. The smell around her was citrus and old books, and a trace of something iron that had no right to be on anyone. "What is this?" I said. It came out small, a child trying not to wake someone. "This is the last train," she said. "It doesn't have a time printed. It has a tendency." Her mouth made that half smile a teacher makes when you get close to the answer and might need to own it yourself. I looked back at the door. It had forgotten how to open. The window showed only my face and a gray that could be fog or could be blank. "They'll tell you you need a ticket," she said. "If you have one, they take it. If you don't, they take what a ticket would be worth." "What does that?" The car shivered. Something tall moved at the far end without the insult of actually walking. "You know the shape of authority, even when it is dressed in old cloth." Let's commit to that because something in me insisted, wore a conductor's uniform, black enough to catch no light, with buttons that made small moons where brass decides not to die. The peaked cap was pulled low. The shadow where his face should have been felt like a place you could get lost in and never be offered a map. He went passenger by passenger, stopping with the courtesy of commerce. They held out their hands. He took something from each with a pinch, as if he were collecting coins you couldn't see. A young woman in a red coat sagged after he passed, and her red seemed older. An older man pressed his hand to his chest and then let it drop, as if the gesture didn't belong to him. The suit with the too narrow tie managed a small smile and then forgot he had. My chest tightened physically, as if the air had decided to become a hand. When the conductor reached our row and turned the blank where his face should be toward me, my name left my pockets. I felt it happen. The hook pulling, the slack, the loss. Not the syllables people say when they need you. The fact of the name, the way it anchors you to your bones. "Ticket?" said the absence. "I don't." My voice was behind glass. "He's new," the woman said. Her voice was low without pleading. "He hasn't paid yet." The conductor's head turned toward her a fraction. There was a pressure shift, ears popping when you haven't climbed. The absence moved on, and the air remembered how to be shared. When I could, I looked at her. "You know him." "No one knows him," she said. "He knows you." "What does he take?" She looked at my hands on the seat, at the whiteness of the knuckles I had not intended. "Pieces," she said simply, "small at first. What you think you can spare." The train didn't go past scenery so much as through possibility. Stations approached, platforms like sketches, lamps that made rings of light where a floor might be if someone funded it, and slid by without stopping. The doors sighed open at none of them and sighed closed again, as if to stretch. At one, a child ran along the platform with something limp under her arm. At the next, the platform was a corridor, and the corridor was a throat, and I stopped trying to make sense of them in sequence. "Where does it go?" I asked. "Down," she said, and when I looked at her in the way you look at someone who has chosen a metaphor, she added, "Away." The stops make you think you have a choice. Choice is part of the harm. "What do I do?" She stared at me for a long beat, and I had the thought, sudden and indecent, that she was beautiful, not for the symmetry of her features, but for the steadiness of someone who had been waiting a long time for the right stranger. "You jump," she said, "when it slows, before the doors, before he wants to ask again." "And you?" She smiled in a way that suggested all decisions had been tried. "I got on before they put numbers on the trains to tell you where you were going. I'm not new. Some days I still remember what my apartment smelled like when the radiator had a good day. That's not enough to get off." "What's your name?" "It was Clara," she said, and there was an ache in the past tense, shaped like a violin string pulled too far across its bridge. "I keep it because they didn't take it the first time. I gave them other things I thought I could spare." He came again. I felt him before I saw him, the way you feel a deep bass note through drywall. He didn't look at me because I had only been taught once, and fairness is a thing even this service seems to respect. He looked at Clara. She held out her hand, and he pinched something from her palm with a delicacy that would have been tender if you didn't know it as theft. "What was that?" I asked when he had gone. "The smell of the radiator," she said, very matter of fact, and I believed her. We passed a stop that had no platform, only a field of chairs arranged like a lecture. The chairs were full. The people in them looked up as we slid by, and their eyes did not change, and one of them had my boss's face at 30, and I hated the accuracy of it. "How do you know when to jump?" I asked. "When you hate staying more than you fear falling," she said. "For you, that will come quick. You brought no blankets. You could come with me." She shook her head. "You don't start by being generous to me. You start by being selfish enough to live." The car shuddered. Ahead, a stop gathered shape, a platform with painted lines, a clock that could have been a twin to Greastone's if time had agreed to stay asleep, a rack of newspapers wrapped in string. The train slowed, not enough to be safe, enough to be wicked. Clara touched my wrist. Her hand was cool, not cold. "Now," she said. "The doors hissed to make you believe in them. I didn't use them. I shoved my duffel ahead and threw myself after it. The air hit back. My shoulder hit concrete and became the whole world for exactly one heartbeat. Then the rest of the pain argued loud enough to be listened to. I rolled away from the edge because the edge wants to see if you want to visit the underside of things. The platform was empty, no newspapers, no clock hands. Whatever the train had shown me to make the notion of landing less obscene evaporated as soon as it could stop behaving. I looked up. The train was gone, not receding, gone. The rails were two black snakes going their own ways. The electric hum of the station was wrong in the way a room feels when someone else has just left it. Stairs rose, concrete patched with gum and old moss. My hands shook so hard I could not trust them with my own pockets. When I stood, my knees tried to convince me they grasped prayer. I took the stairs. Greastone breathed again at the top, like a chest that has just decided there will be more of this. The clock said 12:07, which was a lie of one kind or another. The vending machines hummed their promise of sugar. The posters on the wall made perky suggestions about autumn weekend deals to towns I could never afford. There was a draft that had not been there earlier, a small ribbon of air that smelled like old citrus, and a radiator. My duffel had not made the jump as successfully as I had. It was no longer beside me. I reached to check my wallet and phone, and found absence where both used to live. Something in my chest went to one knee. I walked outside, and the town was the town. Street lamps wore their halos like saints who had stopped being for a moment. The bar at the corner had turned its chairs up on the tables and hosed a day down the drain. My apartment, if I went to it, would be 2 blocks east and 3 north, and there would be a note shoved under the knob because people who like order are very brave when it is late. I stood on the curb and stared down the street and listened to the night give advice and didn't take any of it. I did not see Clara again, not in the way that would have been clean. I saw her in other things, the way frost draws lace in a window and then forgets what it meant, the way the radiator hiccups at 3 in the morning like it is trying to laugh, the way my own name sometimes feels like a jacket I keep putting on backward until I spend a day getting it right. For a week, I did not sleep properly. The door to the bedroom remained open because the closed version felt like a train door learning my hinge. I covered the mirror with a towel and told myself I wasn't doing it for story reasons. Twice at 12:07 exactly, according to an untrustworthy clock, my radio clicked on by itself, and the volume knob turned one notch like a mouth practicing yes. The first time I unplugged it and put the plug on the windowsill where it could watch the rain. The second time I said quietly no to a room that smelled like old citrus and a radiator and the very faintest trace of iron. If this were a different sort of story, that would be that. I would have touched a door the world keeps for fools, and I would have learned. but people who have learned are extravagances this town rarely funds. So I went back to the station because there are habits that look like hope when you squint. Not the next night, not an invitation. A week later, when the cold had sharpened from suggestion to policy, I bought a coffee from the machine that tastes like burned promises and sat on the bench under the clock, and I watched the 11:45 go and the last janitor leave and the guard check the corners with his flashlight beam that knows more than he'll tell. When the platform was mine again, in that way silence sometimes hands you responsibility. You didn't ask to hold. I stood, and I waited for rails to sing. They did. The wind gathered itself and chose the low way along the track. The train slid in without apology. I told myself I would stay on the platform. There is a lot of telling yourself that happens around things like this. When the doors opened, the breath of the car had the smell that memory does when it tries to sneak in, wearing new clothes. The man with the too narrow tie did not look at me when I stepped in. The woman in the red coat had her forehead against the glass, like she was listening for someone who would never bother to knock. I walked down the aisle, and every person I passed felt like a word I had once known how to spell and now could only guess at. Clara sat where she had sat. She turned her head as if she had been saving that motion. Her mouth made the shape of my name, but decided not to get me used to the sound of it. I thought you got off for good, she said. I got off once, I said. That isn't the same. You're not supposed to come back. Neither are you, I said without meaning to be unkind. She smiled in that way that suggests the rule has been broken, and the rule does not care. He'll come, she said, and he did. The conductor's presence bent the aisle. He did not turn toward me immediately, and I understood this to be an acknowledgement that the game only works when the person playing thinks they have consented. He paused at the young man with an earring who had a finger resting on the edge of his seat, as if he had been about to stand and had been told not to. He took something invisible from the boy's palm. The earring dulled. When he reached us, he held out a gloved hand. Ticket, he said. I had brought something. It was stupid. It was also all I had. From my jacket pocket, I took a photograph of my mother at 17. Hair caught in a late summer wind, cigarette held away from her face, like she had been born elegant and only had to remember it. I had stolen the picture from one of the boxes my sister and I had labeled Keep, because we knew better than to label anything else. I held the photograph up. He did not reach for it. He pressed 2 fingers to the air just above the image and pinched. It was not the picture he took. The paper remained against my skin. What left me was the smell of the day I had scanned it with my phone. My mother's laugh at the corner of my apartment that was always dusty, the taste of my coffee, the relief that a picture had stayed. I felt the empty place he left like the small ache where a tooth used to be. That's not a ticket, I said. His head tilted a fraction. The cap's shadow deepened. Everything is, he said, and went on. He can be refused, Clara said quietly, after the pressure lifted. That's the other harm. He can be refused only by refusing to pay a price you won't be able to live with if you do. What did you pay? I don't know anymore, she said. That was the first thing. The stops slid past, each an attempt at bribery in a new tone. A platform full of people holding out their hands with palms up as if they had the law on their side. A corridor of doors, each cracked just enough to show a sliver of light and a shadow passing. A field where a train could sit and wait for grass to learn patience. At one, a station that was exactly Greystone, except the clock read wrong, and the posters on the wall were the ones I had taken down 2 years ago, and the vending machine had a flavor of soda they stopped making when I was a child because it tasted like cough syrup and persistence. The train slowed so sweetly at that one, I could have stepped off without learning anything painful about gravity. I could get off here, I said. I could go upstairs and find a different version of my apartment, where we never had the fight and the letter never came, and the clerk at the booth doesn't know me, and it would keep long enough for me to believe in it. That's one of them, she said. I used to have a stop where the music from the bar on the corner was always the song I loved in May and never heard again. He found it for me. He finds them for you. That's how he gets you to pay twice. What happens if I stay? You become the kind of person who calls it a bargain. She stood then, suddenly, as if her body had moved before she felt like humoring it. The door at the far end of the car had opened on its own, and beyond it I saw a short vestibule and then another car, and in that car I saw people standing, not sitting. The light was different there, warmer, almost honest, and the air changed as if something in me believed dawn had been invented again. You should leave, she said. I can't do it with you. It has to be your fear. And you. I make other people leave, she said, with a shrug, almost proud. Everyone needs a job. We went to the vestibule. The train slowed as it slid past a station with a name I recognized and had never visited, a name from a childhood map where the letters meant far. The doors hissed. We didn't use them. We stepped between cars. The second carriage had a bar at one end. You could lean your elbows and pretend a drink had been poured for you if you wanted your mouth tricked. A man stood there with a napkin under his glass and said to no one, "Cheers," and the conductor appeared next to him like an option and pinched something you couldn't see from his fingers. I wanted to pretend the thing he took was the taste of the drink. The window in this car showed me a different outside. Not stations, not platforms. A city I knew and did not. Streets ghosted by light like web, windows lit and then unlit in no sequence I could claim, bridges drawing lines under lines. My heart did the small double beat it does when the plane dips, and the pilot speaks to prove the plane is paying attention. "Jump," Clara whispered. It wasn't advice, it was the only grammar we had left. I didn't. I walked to the bar as if the man pouring could offer me an argument. Behind the counter, a shelf of bottles held labels in fonts that had not existed yet. One label had my father's handwriting on it. I reached and my fingers met glass that was cooler than anything has the right to be. "Don't buy from him," Clara said, "even if the drink is yours." "Do you ever get to drink again?" I asked, and the laugh she made was exactly human. The conductor turned toward us, and the air thickened, and I chose fear because it was the only thing I owned that still behaved. When the train leaned into something like a curve, and the bodies in the car inclined together as if choreographed, I put my hand flat on the bar, and then on the edge of the doorway, and then into the dark between cars, and used that grip to trust that falling is a fact, not a suggestion. Clara didn't move. She stood where I had stood a week ago, posture like a job. "Go," she said. It had the sound of a word she practiced and liked for the shape it gave her mouth. The jump hurt less this time, because the first time had taught me what stupidity feels like in your shoulder. I hit the platform, rolled, swore, laughed once without wanting to, and lay with my spine against concrete, and watched the underside of the canopy above me, pretend it had never met rain. When I looked down the tracks, there was only track. At the top of the stairs, Greystone was itself enough to forgive me. The clock read 12:07 with the stubbornness of the obtuse. I walked outside, and the air had warmed the way it does when stories are not doing the breathing for you. I went home. I made the kind of coffee you make when you're trying not to wake yourself up. I took my radio and put it in a cupboard and closed the cupboard and put the kettle on top of the cupboard, because petty victories are real. Then I took the photograph of my mother into the kitchen light. The paper was the same. The face was the same. I could see the corner of her mouth where cigarette met the joke. When I held it to my nose, I smelled nothing. It broke me in a way a poem would approve of, and I did not let it. That week I looked for tickets. Not the paper kind, the other kind. Things I could be tricked into thinking I could spare. I found a shoebox of letters and put them back, I found the sweater my ex left and put it in a bag for the thrift store because leaving it in the drawer had become an altar. I found the eviction notice and folded it into a paper plane and threw it at the ceiling until it lodged in the fan, and then I stood on a chair and took it down and burned it in a pie tin. Fire is the only punchline I trust. Sometimes now, at night, the rails hum under the city like a thought you are trying not to have. I take long ways home. I look at station clocks and the minute hands give me back the correct time, which is a gift I didn't know you could negotiate for. When the wind takes the low way along the track, I do not wait for doors. I see Clara in other places, a woman on a bus with a scar where a ring once rubbed, a figure in a laundromat who folds with the care of someone whose hands remember something and refuse to forget it, a reflection in a shop window that makes a mouth against the glass and then doesn't bother to fog it. Once, on a Sunday morning that felt like mercy, I felt the exact temperature of her hand on my wrist as I stepped too close to the edge of a subway platform, and I stepped back and said thank you to no name. If you ask me what the last train wants, I will tell you this: it wants rent. For each time you say aloud that a place has let you down, it offers you a car that can carry you farther from the responsibility of being person-shaped in a world that will make you sit and wait and think you should be grateful. It takes small pieces first: the smell of a radiator, the taste of a drink, the name of a day. It will let you leave if you are willing to jump while it is still pretending to be gentle. Some nights I hear the ticket office shutter slide down in my dreams. Some nights a voice says ticket very softly from the cupboard where the radio lives, and I get up and put the kettle back on top of the door like I am a person who knows how to keep himself. On the worst nights, the conductor walks down the aisle of my ribcage and pinches something I can't name out of the palm of a heart that has already done its work. I wake with my hands open and count to a number that used to mean stairs in the house where I learned to be tall. If you find yourself on the platform after midnight and the rails begin to remember their purpose, listen to the advice that comes through a static you don't deserve. It won't always be mine. It won't always be kind. Jump before the doors open. Refuse to get good at paying. If you carry a photograph, put it in your shoe where no one can reach it without making you dance. And if you meet a woman with long black hair who sits as if sitting paid her rent, and she tells you her name was Clara in a tense that means once and maybe again, do what she says the first time. She has work to do. So do you. The world above the stairs is not much, but it's ours, and the radiators, when they are good, still make a sound that with practice you can keep. Now, on to the next story. They warned me not to take Harlow's Bend after midnight. Every town has a road like it, the shortcut you only admit you use in daylight, the strip of cracked asphalt that feels too narrow for two cars, even though it's striped for them. The kind of place headlights never quite reach far enough. Harlow's Bend was ours. It cut through a stand of oak that had learned to lean, past a ravine that swallowed tires when the shoulder gave, across a creek that had a way of flooding only in the dark. You could make it from my sister's place on the North Ridge to my apartment on Oak and Riverside in 15 minutes on the highway, or in 9 if you shaved the curve, skipped the town lamps, and trusted your brakes. I trusted my brakes. I had trusted them for years. It was the rest of the car, me, that had started to feel suspect. I left my sister's later than I meant to. We'd been in the attic again, sorting through what our mother left, a veil sealed in a zip bag that had gone the color of tea, photo albums with paper corners losing their glue, a music box that had never once wound without squealing like it was objecting to being asked to remember. We found our father's army jacket and a letter he never sent. We found the half-finished baby sweater our mother had started for a child that didn't make it to winter. We found at the bottom of a tub of Christmas lights 3 Polaroids of Harlow's Bend in daylight from before the county stopped mowing the ditches. ribbons of road, nothing to be afraid of. By the time we'd put it all back in different boxes and had exactly the same argument about exactly the same things, keep, trash, no, that's not trash, rain had started, big lazy drops that hit the porch light like moths. My sister offered the couch. I said no. I thought I needed to drive, and if I had stayed, I would have taken the couch long enough to dream the kind of dream that makes you square your shoulders for 3 days. The highway was closed after the river bridge. A crane stood where lanes should be, blinking red like a scolding. The detour sign pointed toward town, long and patient. Harlow's Bend cut 30 minutes off the drive. The sign didn't say not to. The rain wasn't bad yet. I told myself the stories were for kids. I told myself I lacked that caliber of superstition. So I turned down the bend. The first mile is always fine. It's a 2-lane with a line that's more suggestion than law, and the trees don't lean yet. They stand there like they're making themselves available for the idea of a forest. The first culvert rattled my tires the way it always did. I passed the rusty mailbox with no name, where teenagers leave notes for each other in summer. The gap in the fence where the deer pretend they need an invitation. My wipers squealed their small, infuriated squeal. At the second mile, the trees close in. Even in daylight, there's a hush there, the air gone mossy and heavier. At night, the oaks knit their branches like women in pews, and the road loses the word shoulder. My headlights always feel weaker here, like they're working through grief. This time they felt like they were working through my grief. I leaned forward, chin over the wheel, and tried not to make bargains with my own eyes. The sign came up too fast and also right on time. Slow curve ahead. It's a rectangle pitted with rust and old BB shots, the kind of sign the county replaces every other year, and this road eats as practice. It was swaying on its post, just slightly, though the night had gone windless. The rain hit it, ping, ping, and the swaying didn't change. Okay, I said out loud. Saying okay to nobody is a way of telling yourself you're the one who gets to answer. I eased my foot. The car did that float thing it does when you find the edge between control and the road, doing you a favor. The radio crackled to life. I hadn't turned it on. Static bleached the air, then cleared like someone lifting a bowl off a candle. Under it, a voice, not a station, not a song, a voice in the register of a person trying not to panic. Don't stop, it whispered, shredded, no matter what you see. I thumbed the dial out of reflex. The needle didn't move, or it moved and the sound didn't change. The voice shivered up through the speakers, as if it was using my wire. Keep driving, it said, not louder exactly, closer. I pressed the power button. The radio went dead. The silence after had a texture, fine like dust. The curve is tighter than it looks. You can make it without touching the center line if you've had enough practice, and nothing unexpected is there to argue. My lights swung, slick across black. They slid over bark, over wet. They found the woman standing at the shoulder. She wore white. Maybe it had been white once. Now rain had glued it to her body. A slip, or a dress, or some nightgown that shouldn't have been anywhere but a house. Hair dark with water stuck to her cheeks. One hand lifted, thumb out, that old American prayer. I have driven past men with signs, and women with strollers, and boys who thought they could outrun cars. I know how not to stop, but she lifted her head and looked straight through the windshield into me. Her eyes were my mother's. I braked so hard the back of the car did a little prayer to physics. The tires hissed on the wet. We stopped. We stood in it. Me, the engine knocking like a nervous knee. Her, head canted, rain dividing into small insistences on her jaw. Mom? I said, because reflex is bigger than adulthood. Her lips opened like she was learning how again. Please, she said, caught between breath and word. It's cold. Let me in. There's the part of your brain that remembers what 7 feels like. There's the part that has a stack of notices about this exact situation clipped and waiting in a drawer. It's not her, the adult told me, efficient. It's the road. You don't know that, a smaller voice said, sullen, and I hated it for sounding like me. I thumbed the lock. She slipped in like rain slips under doors. You swear you closed. The smell of her was rain and something tinny I didn't want to identify. Her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a nurse to take her back. Up close, she had my mother's face, and also not. The planes were right. The story underneath wasn't. Thank you, she said, and smiled, and the smile was almost right. Then I glanced in the rear view. A man sat in the back seat. I hadn't heard the door. I hadn't felt the shift of weight. He was just there, thin the way hungry can be elegant, a gray suit that didn't belong anywhere but a photograph, a grin that didn't have anything to do with a mouth. I jerked the wheel. The car swayed. Who are you? I asked the mirror. The woman didn't turn. She stared ahead through the fogging glass like a patient in a waiting room they keep too cold, the expression blank and effortful. The man leaned forward until his mouth was near my ear, and the cold of him went through the cotton of my shirt as if it had been waiting for that particular patch of skin. You shouldn't have stopped, he said, almost politely. Now it knows you. I floored the gas. The car fishtailed, caught itself, roared. The curve stretched, then collapsed. Trees became lines, and then noise. The woman didn't move. The man's laughter came from behind my face. The next sign came sooner than it should have. Same rust freckles, same tilt, slow curve ahead. I cursed and braked, and my car stopped in exactly the same place it had before, down to the way the hood dipped. She was there again. The woman, white gone transparent, thumb out, the wet shine of her face. I spun to the passenger seat. Empty. To the back. Empty. The radio hissed as if it had been breath the whole time. Don't stop, the voice said, faint enough for honesty. Don't stop again. I believed that. I believed it enough to hurt. I dropped the car into drive and went around wide. My light swept her face just enough for me to see she had stopped trying to look like my mother. She wore some other arrangement of bones now, something hungrier. Her mouth widened as if to take a mouthful of my car, and then she did what all animals do when you don't give them what they flatter themselves to be owed. She smiled like she'd be patient. The road kept looping. I don't mean I kept getting lost. Lost is when choices become stories, and every story fights for your mouth. This was a loop. I could have set my watch by it if my watch had not stopped at the moment the radio found a voice. Rain blurred the windshield. The speedometer found speeds I don't usually offer it, and every time the sign slid out of the trees like a repeat. Every time the bend made the shape of itself, and the shoulder offered the woman like a test nobody passes the first time. I drove past her 5 times. 6. On the 7th, she wasn't on the shoulder. She was in the middle of the road, hands at her sides like a girl waiting for a photo. I didn't stop. I didn't stop because I am capable of obedience when it is the only weapon left. I leaned on the horn, and my car's poor voice made the hollow sound like it was protesting a tax. I swerved around her, wide enough to spray the ditch, and for a full second we were window to window, and she tilted her head as if to memorize the angle of mine. I drove. The loop does not forgive, but it learns. By the 10th pass, there were more of them. A boy I'd sat next to in sophomore English, hair still blonde and likely forever now wet. My father sober and unhandsome, which is how he tried to be near the end. My first kiss, which felt like a cruelty because it reminded me of poor judgment that had not required supernatural assistance to acquire. They stood in the rain or sat on the guardrail that hasn't guarded anything since the year they paved the road and forgot to pave sense into it. They raised thumbs. They kept their smiles gentle until you got just close enough to see how they were welded on. The radio was not a voice now. It had turned into voices. They overlapped the way people on party lines used to, a murmur of advice that would have been easier to ignore if any of it had been unkind. Keep going. This part ends. Don't give under the name. One voice came through clearer when I passed the sign. My mother's voice, not the imitation. It said, "Don't pick me up," which is something she never had to say in life, because I have never been able to let anything sit where it wanted without asking it if it needed water. At some point, the numbers on my dash gave up. The green went out of them and left them as absent as the moon. The needle on the fuel gauge headed toward my failure. I did the math you do when you are stuck in a story, and the only way out is to live long enough for it to end. The math did not like me. On the 14th loop, the man in the back seat was there again. No door, no shift, just the particular cold his mouth makes when it wants your ear. "We can do this all night," he said, conversational, like truckers at a counter at 2 a.m. "I can't," I said, and my voice almost broke on the T. He clucked his tongue. "You can't imagine what you can do when you're invited properly." I pressed my finger into the soft place of my palm until the pain brought prayer back into the range of things I remembered how to do. On the 15th loop, something changed enough to frighten me beyond anger. The curve tightened, not by much, by the thickness of a promise. The oaks leaned another angle in, made a roof of the road, shrugged off the sky. My headlights hit a wall of rain, so heavy it looked like a curtain. The sign swayed as if someone had bumped it walking by. When the car broke through that sheet, the air tasted wrong. Less fresh, sharp, like damp copper. "We're in deeper," the man in the back seat said, pleased. "Good. Sometimes it takes a while for you to learn to listen." "I'm listening to the radio," I said, surprised by how steady I sounded. It told me not to stop. "Oh," he said, "that's me too." And he laughed. The laugh wasn't cruel. It wasn't anything. It was patience pretending to be sociable until patience could eat. On the 19th loop, the figure on the shoulder was a girl in a jacket too big for her, jeans rolled to keep from dragging. The eyes were not anyone I knew. The mouth was. It was mine, at 13, when I discovered what a mirror could do to you if you held its gaze too long without a purpose. She lifted her thumb like hitching was a skill she'd been looking forward to mastering. I rolled past her. The radio whispered, "Good." My hands were cramping from the way I was holding the wheel. My right calf had started to send up fireworks every time I asked it for gas. I wondered if I could make the loop on cruise control, and if letting the car pretend to be me would count as surrender. I did not try to find out. On the 23rd loop, there was a light. It wasn't the sign. It wasn't a car. There hadn't been any cars since the crane. It was the yellow square of a window, way off through the trees, up the hill past the bend. It looked like a gas station looks in the middle of nowhere when you have learned how to believe in good luck again. The voice on the radio went quiet. That was how I knew this light was dangerous. I gritted my teeth and drove past the curve and the shoulder with no one on it, and the place where the oaks made a tunnel and the sign that had been waiting. The yellow stayed with me. Then it was ahead again, closer. The road is a thing that thinks it is a straight line until you ask it to be. I reached a cross street that I've never seen in daylight. Four-way stop, wet paint bright, a sign with 3 places I didn't know. On the far corner, a service station that hadn't been built in this county any time I'd been alive. Glass on 3 sides, old pumps with belly dials, a Coke machine that was trying to remember its youth. The bell on the drive clicked when my tires went over it. Inside, a man stood up from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a rag, and smiled right at me. The door to the station swung open before I had time to decide whether my car would turn itself off if I removed the key. The man waved like we'd known each other. He wore coveralls with Harlows stitched over the breast. His hair had the shine of men who know where grease lives. The light behind him made a rectangle of his shoulders and cut a square out of the rain. "Lucky night," he said. His voice came through glass. It felt like it came up through the floor of my car. "You're near out, aren't you?" I checked the gauge. If it had any truth left, it said I was a quarter from being interesting. He laughed. "You're past empty. We can top you off. Come on in and sign." I turned the radio back on with a finger I couldn't feel. Static. Then a voice I recognized because it had told me to eat when I didn't want to sit when sitting was the worst. "Don't go inside," my mother said, very tired and very exact. The rain slackened in that way. Rain does when it wants you to feel sorry for it. Harlow, if that's what he was wearing, and that's what he wanted to be, leaned his hip against the door jamb and scratched a cheek that didn't itch. "Your mother," he said, friendly, "always thought she could keep you from making friends." I should have driven. I should have backed out with my hands steady. Instead, I reached for the handle on instinct, the human thing where another human is framed in bright, and you think, "Yes, door." The minute my fingers closed, the man's smile widened. Not like a smile does, but like a drawer does, and for a full second, the light behind him went wrong. Too cold, too white, not light at all. But the idea of light, so bright, I saw the tiny bones in his hand raised in welcome. I drove. He didn't shout. He didn't chase. He stood there with his rag, and the bell on the drive clicked twice, and the yellow square died like a TV set, clicking off. After that, the loop was different. The oaks leaned away a hair, as if embarrassed. The sign had a fresh BB scar. The smell of wet copper faded to old rain. On the 26th pass, the woman in white stood on the shoulder with her thumb out and her mouth composed and her eyes not anyone's eyes anymore. I did not stop. The radio said nothing. I decided I didn't believe in voices. The gas needle went under the red line and then under whatever goes under red. The car complained like a child who has learned the word no and enjoys its mouth feel. I said okay to nobody again. I loosened my hands. I waited to coast and knew that when I did, there would be no shoulder to save me. The car coughed, coughed. On the 29th loop, halfway between the sign and the center of the curve, the engine let go like a lover who had been kind for longer than anyone would expect. The rain had gentled to a lick. The wipers squealed and then went still because I switched them off to hear what absence sounds like. The road carried me. Momentum, then stubbornness. The car rolled almost politely, as if it had been reminded of manners it learned in a driveway and decided to show them to me. The woman stood in the middle of the road again. Her dress clung and defined. Her hair drew letters down her neck. She did not raise her thumb. She raised her hand, palm out, the sign you use to make someone stop from across a room without talking. And because my foot was already on the brake, it felt like obedience. I could have let the car do what it would do and aim for shoulder and stall and sit with her at the window while she learned my mother's mouth again. I put it in neutral and steered for the edge. The tires found gravel. Gravel found ditch. The car settled with a long, relieved exhale, as if it had been trying to spare my feelings by taking its time. She walked toward the driver's side slow, the way women in bad commercials walk toward convertibles. Her face was my mother's again. She had found the exact wrong smile. "Please," she said, and it was my mother's voice with the morphine gravel in it, and also the small humor a person uses when you are disappointing them. "Don't be cruel." "I'm not," I said, which was the first true thing I had said to the road. "I'm busy." She laughed with both sides of her mouth. Behind her, in my back seat through the fogged glass, something made the shape of sitting. The radio clicked on by itself and made a sound like a phone connecting. A second voice. A man said, "We're almost done," as if we were both waiting for a bus. I cracked the window an inch. The air smelled like petrichor and old pennies, and the mint gum my mother chewed when she stopped smoking. "What happens if I get out?" I asked. The woman cocked her head. Rain streamed. "You walk," she said. "You walk back to where you were supposed to go, and when you turn around to see how far you've come, the road will be behind you as if it had never existed. Will you follow?" She looked amused. "I'm always in front." I closed the window. I turned the key. The engine offered me the small wheeze a pet gives when you try to coax it back past wanting. The radio whispered, "Foot now," and I put my foot on the gas as if the car could be tricked into remembering that wanting and doing are cousins. It coughed. It died again. I sat with my hands open on my knees. Rain dotted my jeans through the crack in the seal where the door had never fit right. In the rear view, the man leaned forward, closer now, as if about to tell me a recipe. "You know," he said, "there's a way to make this pleasant. You pretend your grief is a passenger, and you give it your lap, and you keep your hands on the wheel, and when it reaches for your throat, you call that intimacy. Is that what you want?" I asked. "Intimacy?" "That," he said, "or patience." He put his hands on the back of my seat and the springs in its side. My mother knocked on the glass. Not anger, not demand. The knock of a person who expects to be let in because you love her and also because she is cold. I looked at her hands. The nails were wrong. My mother bit her nails until they were careful, half moons of small shame. These were clean, oval, perfect, and that was what saved me. "I'm sorry," I said to the wrong hands, and the dress, and the rain, and the road, and the voice that had used the radio like a throat. "I can't help you." When I put my hand on the key again, the engine started. No coaxing, no cough, just the ordinary small miracle of pistons remembering their shoulders. I slid the car back onto the asphalt like I was leaving a dance with a partner who would tell stories about me later. The woman's face fell through 3 expressions too many to belong to one person. The man in the back laughed once, the laugh of a person who lost at cards and has decided to be excellent about it. And then the radio said in my mother's true voice, "Go." So I went. The loop didn't break. That would be too much like a moral. It thinned. The oaks made a little room. The sign swayed like someone had kicked it from a passing truck. The curve felt less confident about its own geometry. When the bend unspooled into straight, and the trees on either side returned to being trees instead of audience, the yellow light of town found me like it had been waiting for an apology. The car ran on fumes in relief into the empty grid of 2 a.m. My streetlights are sodium orange. They made the wet look warm. I parked under the tree that drops helicopter seeds in spring like a dad showing off for his kids. The engine ticked. Rain softened to memory. When I turned the key off, the radio clicked and then whispered, so soft I thought I might be inventing it. "Home." I sat there long enough for the windshield to fog over the places where my hands had been. When I lifted them, they left prints that looked exactly like prints. In the rear view, there was nothing but the back seat and my jacket thrown on it and the dent where I'd once dropped a toolbox and lied to my landlord about it. The woman's face, my mother's face, did not swim up. The man did not make himself comfortable. The road did not find a way into my cul-de-sac and rest his elbows on my hood and ask me to step outside. Inside, I hung my keys on the hook my sister insists we have so I won't lose them. I went to the bathroom and turned the light on and looked into the mirror because sometimes bravery is just that mundane. My face was my face. The glass behind it reflected the open door, the hallway with the thrift store runner, the frame of a photograph I had hung crooked a year ago and stopped seeing. I slept with my shoes by the door and a towel over the bedroom mirror. I woke 3 times to the sound of rain that wasn't there. Once I woke to the sound of the radio in the living room, trying to tune itself. I got up and found it unplugged and put the plug on top of it like a parent does to a remote. In the morning, the sun made a promise it doesn't have to keep. I called my sister and said I was coming back to help with the attic. She asked if I'd taken the bend. I told her I'd taken the long way. Neither of us used the words for those two things. I don't drive Harlow's Bend, not after midnight, not when the rain starts. When people say shortcut, I say no. When teenagers at the diner say they saw the woman in white, I ask them what shoes she wore, and if they say they didn't look, I pay for their coffee, and I say next time, look at hands. Hands never learn how to lie correctly. Sometimes late, when the wind comes down from the ridge and the night learns where it forgot to be quiet, my radio will click in the living room. Once it said softly, keep driving, like a goodbye that did not require my answer. Once it said my name in the voice I already carry inside me, which is my mother's, and I said nothing back, because some loves stay the size they are, only if you don't feed them the wrong thing. If you take Harlow's Bend after midnight, you might make it. People do. Most come back with a story that gets longer in the retelling, and a smile that tries too hard for your benefit. A few come back and stop smiling, as if they've used the muscles up and are saving them. A handful don't come back in the way that gets counted. If you go, keep the radio off, or on. If you're the kind of person who needs a voice to argue with, don't stop. The woman will be someone you know, or someone you wish you had. If you must look, look at hands. Don't follow yellow squares into lit rooms that don't belong to your day. If you stall, it will ask you to be polite. You may be everything else you are, but don't be that. When you get home, and you will, if you keep your hands and your yes to yourself, sit in the quiet and listen to your house breathe. Put a towel over the mirror if it makes you feel like you made a decision. Call the person who keeps your spare key and tell them you were going to call anyway. If the radio clicks and a voice uses your mother's grammar, remind the air that you already know how to drive. Sometimes the bend will try to be in front of you again. Sometimes it will be. When it is, there is no trick, only this. Keep moving. The loop likes patience. Don't loan it yours. And if the road says your name exactly right, don't give it the comfort of correcting its pronunciation. Keep both hands on the wheel. Remember the sign. Let the curve be a curve and not a commandment. Count to the far side. When you reach it, do not look in the rear view to check. The bend loves that. It loves to be believed. Let it wonder instead. Let it stand there in the rain with its bad mouth and patient friends, and the yellow square waiting for someone who doesn't know better, and let it tell itself stories about you in which you were kinder than you had to be and still didn't stop. That's how you win on Harlow's Bend, not by defeating anything, but by refusing to audition for the part it's been saving for you since the first sign swayed and no wind moved it. Now, on to the next story. The path to her hut does not appear until you are already walking on it. It is like that with some mistakes. You think you chose the road, but it chose you when you took your first hungry step. I went into the forest because my brother was dying, and the doctors had run out of ways to say no without using the word. I brought the things the old stories say to bring when you seek Baba Yaga: bread, salt, a ribbon, and a question with a price you are willing to pay. I wore boots that remembered other miles. I tied my hair back so the trees would have less to hold. The forest met me like a person who knows your family. It was not friendly. It was not cruel. It was interested. The birches stood like white ribs. The pines leaned into each other to whisper. A crow hopped from branch to branch above me saying nothing, which is how crows are kind. I walked until the path appeared beneath my feet, like something burnt into the earth a long time ago. It wound toward a smell you can only call old. Smoke, iron, mushrooms, the crispness of winter that's waiting at the edge of summer. I knew I had arrived when the fence greeted me. It is polite to say the fence is made of bones. It is more accurate to say the fence is made of warnings. They glowed faintly as if they remembered the argument. Beyond the fence, the hut stood on its chicken legs, half asleep, one talon scratching idly at the earth. The door faced away from me because that is how doors are when you don't deserve them yet. I placed the bread on the ground and the salt on the bread. I tied the ribbon to the lowest rung of the gate and spoke the rhyme every child in our village knows, but only fools or desperate people try on a real hinge. Fence, turn your teeth to the forest and your back to me, I said. The fence sighed like an old woman rising from a chair and rotated with the resigned delicacy of machinery that knows it will outlast you. The gate opened. The hut's door angled an ear, listening. I took one step, then two, then stopped because stories say you must never go farther than the house wants you to. Baba Yaga, I called, voice steady the way you make it when your heart is trying to climb a ladder with no rungs. I have brought bread and salt. The door opened a crack. Heat washed out, along with the smell of something simmering that might have been soup and might have been a lesson. Bread and salt, said a voice that had taught generations to stand up straighter. And what else? A question, I said. The door opened wider. The hut bent down to make the step more manageable. Chicken legs can be considerate when well fed. Inside, the ceiling sloped low, as if to remind you to bow your head. Herbs hung in bunches like children holding hands. A stove breathed. In a chair carved from a log sat the old woman herself, small and huge, bony and plush, beautiful and terrible, the way winter looks from the right window. Speak it, she said, picking at her teeth with a finger bone that might once have belonged to a saint or a thief. My brother is dying, I said. He is young and kind, and his life has not had enough time to make its own mistakes yet. I want him to live. She nodded as if I had ordered a soup she liked to make. And the price? I had rehearsed brave things, my hair, my hands, my shadow, but when I opened my mouth, what came out was truer. Take my luck, I said. All of it. The old woman laughed, delighted. Luck is a petty coin, she said. It pays for nothing you actually want and buys you everything you don't. Keep your luck. Give me something you cannot measure. My voice? I asked, afraid then, because I am a person who speaks to earn rent. Words are a renewable resource, she said. Come now, don't insult me with thrift. What do you want? I asked, and the hut leaned in, and the fence settled, and the crow on the roof cocked his head to better hear the shape of my refusal. Your certainty, she said, all of it. The dull, heavy thing that lets you sleep. The ugly little engine that tells you tomorrow will mostly resemble today because it is polite to do so. I half laughed, half cried. That's not a thing, I said. It is, she said. It's the only thing worth anything. You will wake and not know if the floor remembers the weight of you, if water plans to be wet, if doors still choose open over shut. You will be a guest in every hour, and you will not know the etiquette. If I give it, I asked, will he live? She shrugged in the exact way my grandmother used to, full of God and honestly who knows. He will live as long as lives live when nothing interferes with them, she said, which is to say, long enough to make his own mistakes in his own voice, and perhaps to see winter be beautiful from the right window. I looked at the bread and salt in my hands, and then at my hands, and then at the old woman, and realized that bargains are just mirrors placed cleverly. Take it, I said. Baba Yaga smiled like a gate opening. Sit, she said, and when I did, she placed 2 fingers against my forehead. She didn't take it like an extraction. She invited it out the way. A nurse invites a splinter. It hurt and didn't. It felt like stepping from a train platform onto a train that had not yet decided whether it exists. It felt like learning to pronounce a word that never stays still long enough to keep its vowels. When she removed her hand, the room brightened and dimmed in the same motion. My eyes took 2 steps to find the wall. Go home, she said. Carry bread back. Feed your brother. He will be hungry after life returns to him. What do I owe? I asked, because my mother raised me to write thank you notes. You already paid, she said, and the fondness in her voice was almost cruel. Now go before the hut decides to nap. Outside, the forest was less a place and more a suggestion. The path led me and did not. The fence rotated back to show its teeth to me, which is neighborly if you think about it. The crow flew ahead and then behind, and then sat on my shoulder briefly to remind me that I now belonged equally to before and after. I made it home by remembering and forgetting at the same time. The house was a question mark when I reached it. The door felt surprised to see me. My brother lay in his bed, breathing like he was trying it for the first time. He woke at dusk, hungry as promised. He ate bread and salt and soup and the rest of a chicken he apologized to with every bite. He slept like a new road, straight, with a little curve in exactly the right place. I went to pour water and watched it hang between pitcher and glass for a long, thoughtful moment before deciding to fall. The floor and I negotiated. Stairs introduced themselves at the top and were new at the bottom. I laughed and cried, and laughed again, because anxiety is just awe wearing yesterday's hat. Days became possible in a sequence that refused to admit it was a sequence. Good, let them refuse. My brother grew, then went back to the work of living. He asked me what had happened. I told him, a hut, a fence, a woman who knew where to put her teeth. He believed me because certainty had leaked from our rooms and left space for belief. Twice a month I go back to the forest with bread and salt and a ribbon. Sometimes the path appears under me, sometimes it doesn't, and I end up sitting on a stump talking to a mushroom that looks like a chair. On the days I find her, Baba Yaga feeds me soup that tastes like remembering the name of the first person who made you laugh. We talk about crows. I bring her stories that don't end. She likes those best. Once I asked her if certainty ever grows back. She shook her head. If it did, you'd only spend it again, she said. Better to learn how to live without it. How? I asked. She gestured at the door that hadn't been there a moment ago and was now the only door in the world. Bread and salt, she said, and the grace to let water decide. At night, when the house tilts like a boat deciding which river to choose, I put my feet on the floor and thank it for its service. When the coffee hangs in the air thinking it might want to be rain, I wait and say, as you like. When my brother laughs in the next room, it sounds like a small god inventing morning. I don't know if it will continue. I don't need to. If you go to her, don't bring luck. It is a petty coin. Bring a price you can feel leaving. Bring a question that is not a command. And when she asks for something you thought wasn't a thing, say yes if you can. You might learn how to be a guest in your own life, in a way that makes every hour set a plate for you. The path won't show until you're on it. That's the trick and the blessing. Walk anyway. The forest knows your family, and if the floor forgets you, introduce yourself again kindly until it remembers your weight. Now, on to the next story. The first time I heard the song, I thought it was the wind doing what wind does in places that have been emptied of purpose. The old quarry everyone in town called the Hollow had been shut for decades, a bite taken out of the hill and never chewed. I camped there because I was cheap, tired, and too proud to admit the motel's flickering vacancy sign made me nervous in a different way. By day, the Hollow looked like ruin with a view. Rusted cables drooped in lazy parabolas. A shattered conveyor belt lay like a peeled road. The pit itself dropped in terraces of stone, the color of old teeth, every ledge filigreed with scrub that had no interest in my opinion. By night, the edges lost their lines. The dark poured down and held still. I ate from a can, read by headlamp, until the words turned into ants, and slept hard enough to forget there was anything to be afraid of. Sometime near midnight, I woke because a voice was humming, not close, not far, the way a refrigerator hums felt before it's heard. It threaded the air with a tune more shape than melody, like the tale of a lullaby after the words fall off. I lay very still and listened to the tent fabric do its small shivers. The hum bent upward and down, then paused on a note that tasted like cold metal. I unzipped the flap an inch. Moonlight lay on the quarry floor in pale ribs. The wind moved in careful hands. Down in the pit, fog had gathered, or there had been no fog when I went to sleep. It was not rolling or rising, it was waiting. The tune changed. It tried my name. Not a perfect pronunciation, just the outline of it, like a stranger who has read it once and risks it anyway. My skin lifted as if a temperature had dropped inside me, that the air would get around to later. I closed the flap and told myself that sleep folds strange sounds into the shape of whatever you fear most. The second night, in a motel 20 miles away, the vent above the bed hummed the same melody. A woman's voice, high and even, like a mother who has rehearsed calm. When she reached the place where the note bent down, the vent breathed my name correctly. The TV volume didn't help, neither did running the sink. In the morning, I put my coffee down untouched and asked the waitress if anyone had ever complained about a noise from the hollow. She went still, in the kind of way you see around grief. "Don't go back," she said, not unkindly. I wasn't planning to. She looked at me the way my fifth-grade teacher did when I said I hadn't eaten the paste. It remembers who listens. The third night, I sat where the pit's lip turned to shale, and the wind had to decide whether to go on or circle back. Fog moved below, as if someone were stirring something heavy with a spoon too long. The song began as if it had been playing and only now decided to include me, soft, patient, expectant. When it tried my name, it didn't try. It knew. "What do you want?" I asked, because questions buy time. The fog took on the suggestion of bodies, thin as pencil lines. Dozens, maybe more. They swayed gently, like reeds that have learned sorrow. The humming multiplied, harmonies arriving and leaving with the unison of a tide. The tune was older than the quarry and younger than the rock. "Come down," said my own voice from inside the song. Not an echo, a perfect mimicry. I stood. I didn't mean to. The body answers music with movement. Gravel shifted under my boots. The descent toward the service road suddenly looked reasonable, like stairs you just hadn't seen before. I took one step because one step is how falling introduces itself. A beam of white light slashed the fog. A truck's horn startled the hill. The foreman of the road crew, who'd been regrading the county line, leaned out his window, face creased with a kind of anger that has fear woven in. "Not tonight," he called, as if he knew the schedule. I blinked. The shapes below softened back into fog. The song dropped to a hum that felt like a room clearing its throat. "Not tonight," I said back, to the pit or myself. I went home by a route my GPS didn't recognize until it did. After that, it stopped being nightly. It started being everywhere. A kettle reached a boil in my apartment and held the note too long. The elevator in my building found a frequency I hated. A woman on the train hummed under her breath, a melody that made me stand between cars for the rest of the ride. No matter where I went, the same cadence threaded the day. Up, down, hold, my name, a plea that wore politeness like clothes. I avoided sleep and then wanted it desperately. I smiled too wide while people talked. I began to look at storm drains as if they were mouths. The voice in the vent grew bolder. I taped a towel over it, and it hummed through cotton. I put my head under a shower, and it built itself from the water. I asked the town historian, because historians sometimes say the wrong thing and save your life. He used words like scrip and company store and accident, then shifted to softer ones: collapse, widows, unrecovered. He said the pit had a second dig in the 20s, quiet, off the books, below the level where the ledge had broken years earlier. He said they'd chased a vein past where the engineers would sign, and the tunnels got narrow, and the men got small in the dark. He said the company moved the fence and the map and a line item, and then moved away. He said no one ever heard rocks landing when they threw them in to test the depth. He lowered his voice like I might know someone who had never climbed back out. On his desk lay a ledger of names in 2 columns, shifts and Sundays. Pencil thin, some scored, some entirely erased, some smudged like someone had rubbed them and then stopped. He let me read until my eyes blurred. Beside the list, he'd written a single sentence. What sings down there isn't grief alone. What else? I asked. Hunger, he said, and then he crossed it out with 1 line so he could still read it. I stopped going to work. I stopped telling anyone I wasn't. Sleep slid out from under me. I found myself standing by the sink at 4 a.m., holding a glass as if I had always held it. The tune had become a presence that didn't need sound. I heard it in my molars. I felt it in my wrists. My body tuned itself to a pitch the world didn't share. The 4th night on the rim, I brought earplugs, then didn't put them in because I was honest enough to know they only stop air. The fog below had thinned into columns, like pillars in an old knife. It was quiet, too quiet, the held breath silence of a stage before the actor walks on. I said, what happens if I do? The song answered by adding a second voice, low and familiar. My father's from the kitchen at 2 a.m. after the funeral. He hummed when he washed the last dish. He hummed when he couldn't say my name without breaking it. He hummed the same rise and fall, not because he'd known it then, but because the hollow did now, and lent it to him retroactively, because time makes poor fences once you agree to it. Rage is a good rope. I grabbed it. You don't get to use him, I said, and the fog pulsed as if insulted, then smoothed, then brightened faintly from within. A shape resolved near the bottom of the shaft. Small. A child, hand to mouth, shushing me. Above her, a woman swayed with a bundle in her arms that might have been water, might have been a blanket, might have been a baby. Around them, lines of men in canvas coats leaned on tools. They were still as photographs, and yet they were moving, a posture learned when a voice is near you. Want to honor. What are you? I asked. The answer reached my chest without touching my ears. Not one, many, not dead, not only. Do you want me? We want what listens. Why me? You stayed. I did. Not at the rim. I'd run. But everywhere else, in the vent, at the sink, on trains, in doorways, I had made space for the song in hours where memory should live. What happens if I go down? The child raised both hands in a pantomime of lifting. The hummed melody found a note halfway between welcome and warning. The fog took on the suggestion of walls. The pit felt narrower. Say I did, I said, bitter now. Say I step, say I slip, say you sing me into a path I can't see, and I crawl on my knees so my hands can learn the turns by how the stone jogs at the seam. Say I reach you. What then? The song softened around my name in a way that hurt. Stay. And if I don't, we will sing from where you sleep. Thunder rolled far off, not from clouds, but from the spine of the hill. A rock loosened and fell. It took a long time to become smaller. I didn't hear it land. The road foreman found me crouched by the pit at dawn and squatted the way men do when they would like to offer you dignity. He lit a cigarette and let it burn in his hand. My grandfather, he said, after the silence had become something you could stand on, is just a shift. Long time ago, the old men still spit when they say it. He came home with white in his hair and red in his eyes. He woke up nights and said there was a fine sound under his feet, sweeter than a fiddle, and if he could only get back to it, he would be righteous in the morning. What happened? Nothing for a while, which was the problem. He was no good at anything but being near the edge. Then one June he walked back. Folks watched him go and practiced the story of how they tried to stop him. He didn't fall. The foreman pinched ash into a small, neat pile on the gravel. Not exactly. What do you do when you hear it? I asked. Pour coffee, he said. Walk away from anything that rhymes. Don't hum to yourself, not even happy. A song's a hook looking for a jaw. I laughed, then cried, which are the same motion with different names. I think it likes me. It does, he said kindly and without comfort. It likes everyone it can make a chord from. For days I practiced forgetting. I slept with a loud fan. I left the TV on an infomercial at volume 3. I practiced speaking aloud to my plants in ways that did not sound like a tune. When the vent sighed, I put on rain sounds and refused to notice if they found a key. I walked city blocks that had corners. I stood in crowded places and let other people's noises press in. The song learned my schedule and went looking for paces I had not worn yet. It found the laundromat at 3 a.m., where machines do a kind of whale song if you let them. It found a stairwell that multiplied footsteps. It found the second stall in the bathroom at work, where a crack in the tile made a reed sound when the door closed. It is hard to unteach your ears. It is harder to take the voice in your head that says this is for you and tell it, not tonight, and then not tomorrow, and then not again until tomorrow grows a rind. The last time I went to the hollow, the air over the pit was very clear, the way air gets after a storm chooses elsewhere. No fog, no suggestion of bodies, no sound. The quiet was bigger than my name. I sat and hung my legs over the drop like an idiot at a swimming hole. I spoke in prose. I recited recipes. I said the alphabet in threes. I told the quarry the names of my teachers in order. I told it the worst and smallest things I'd done, the petty meannesses that collect like grit in the bends of a life. I did not sing. At sunset, when the sky went bruise-colored and the first bat practiced the shape of a turn, a note rose from below like a hand. It was wrong, off by a hair. I didn't look down. I stood and stepped back, and then back again. I didn't run, because running is a rhythm, and rhythms are roads. I moved to a place with traffic and bad saxophone on subways, and neighbors who play two-note doorbells. I kept my windows open so the street could fill me. I learned other sounds. I hummed nothing. I listened to talk radio, to sports, to my idiot upstairs neighbor who screams laughing at 2 in the morning. My father's voice stayed where it belongs now, on the other end of a saved voicemail I won't delete. When the kettle catches a certain pitch, I lift it off, let it cool, and set it back down sideways so it will remember to be water. Sometimes, in the middle of a crowded day, a truck backing up will hit the interval just right, and my mind will walk to the edge. Sometimes I wake and hear the vent breathe one note too long, and I put my palm flat to the wall and tell it a list of groceries until the list runs out of tune. Sometimes I hear my name from a mouth in a room I'm not in, and I say, not tonight. The hollow is a place where stone remembers a choir. It is also a habit in the body. It will be, forever, one of the ways I could end. I think of the child who raised her hands. I think of the foreman's grandfather, righteous in the morning he never reached. If you camp near a pit people call by a proper noun, be suspicious of your bargains. If a song finds you, give it a shape with a door and get out of the room. Do not go to vents. Do not test wells. Do not practice humming. When it uses your father's voice, don't answer. When it learns yours, teach it boredom. When the wind is only wind, thank it aloud, badly and flat. Make your voice a dull instrument. Hang on to ugly noise. Stay where corners keep their promises. And if you ever stand at the lip of a perfectly quiet hole, and it calls you by name, say what the road crew says. Not tonight. Say it until the hill forgets you. Then go home by a way you have to count. Now, on to the next story. The trouble didn't start when the hospital closed. It started when we pretended it was gone. Ashford sat on its hill like a red brick scab the town couldn't stop picking. 20 years of weather had gnawed the cornice, vines pulled at the lintels, windows gaped with black squares where glass used to be teeth. Still, the building kept its posture, chin up, listening. Teenagers dared each other through the front doors. Ghost hunter channels climbed the stairwells for clicks. We told each other the place was basically a ruin, which is something people say when they want a thing to stop having obligations. I'm a paramedic. Buildings that refuse to be finished are my workplace. You learn their moods the way you learn families. Which door sticks, which elevator lies, which hallway collects the fights. But a building isn't supposed to watch you back. You're not supposed to feel the light in a broken window tilt to follow you as you cross a parking lot. The first Ashford patient we got in the ER made it hard to keep performing indifference. He came barefoot through the automatic doors at 2 in the morning on a police escort, clothes torn, soles shredded by glass. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't high. He smelled like wet plaster and the inside of a pipe. He hugged his head as if he could make his skull one size smaller. "Don't let the windows see me," he told me when I knelt by the gurney. He wouldn't let me shine my light in his eyes. He flinched from the stainless panel on the cabinet. He turned the monitor screen away from himself with a frantic hand. "Cover them. Everything that can see you back." The attending ordered a sedative. Tamsin, the triage nurse, the one who keeps a spare banana in her pocket and hands me crackers when my blood sugar forgets to exist, stepped in with the syringe. The man looked straight at her and smiled with too many teeth for the rest of him. "They already marked you," he whispered. "It's too late. You looked." She flinched. He couldn't have known she'd gone to Ashford the week before with her boyfriend and 2 of his idiot friends to film some urbex, as if the word could make a century behave. I only knew because she'd laughed about graffiti, help me written upside down, while we restocked oxygen. The sedative took him down. We tucked sheets over his cut feet and told the chart a polite lie. Agitated, likely intoxication. Observe. 2 days later, Tamsin's husband found her at dawn, sitting on the sofa with both hands in her lap, staring at the black TV. Her eyes were wide enough to sting. She didn't blink when he said her name. When he switched the TV on, she flinched so hard she bit her tongue and started to cry without making a sound. They admitted her to psych, EEG normal, MRI clean. The note in the chart said, catatonia, with a question mark, because charts like punctuation when certainty is expensive. The roomer in the break room said it out loud. Ashford followed her home. A week later, we hauled in a college kid who'd gone in with friends. They said he'd paused at the second-floor bathroom mirror as a joke, then wouldn't stop looking. By the time they dragged him out, his palms were bloody from trying to scrape his own cheeks, as if his face were something stuck on wrong. He sobbed in our rig so hard he couldn't breathe. I bagged him gently and murmured like you do to a panicked horse. He choked out. He smiled first. I tried not to. It made me. That should have been enough to keep me away. But paramedics are bad at believing other people's lessons. We need to touch the stove ourselves. It was my partner who pushed. Dan chews gum like it owes him money, keeps his boots polished for luck, and thinks superstition should be paid in mockery, not reverence. Black mold, he said, when the third Ashford-adjacent call came in, and the plasma screens threw our faces back at us, a half-second slow. Snaky whatever, spores mess with your head. You think mold makes mirrors lie? I asked. I think mold makes people sick. Sick people interpret the world with whatever stories they preloaded. He flicked his gum into the trash with the cheerful spite of a man who has been wrong often and hates to add to the count. Off shift tomorrow, 30 minutes. N95s. We sniff and go. There are 1,000 places I won't follow a friend off duty. Bathrooms and bars. Living rooms with men who say they don't need help and keep their fists in their pockets. The hill. I meant to say no. Then I thought about Tamsin's wide eyes. I thought about the barefoot man's teeth. I said fine, and hated the part of me that can't leave a bandage unlifted. We parked by the rusted gate just before midnight. The moon looked like a peeled egg someone had held in a hand too long. Our flashlights cut cones through a smell like pennies and rain. The front door lay on its side like a tongue. We stepped over it. The lobby tile cracked under our boots. Graffiti shouted the vocabulary of 16. Help me kill her inside. A wonky pentagram layered until yesterday's jokes turned into a sediment of old fear. We swept the first corridor, patient room doors with narrow wired windows. Our lights stuttered our forms across the glass. Two tall shapes, masks on. I forced myself to keep my light on the floor because floors tell the truth about the day. See? Dan said, trying briskness. Mold and kids. Smell? I asked. We both sniffed like dogs. The air tasted metallic, a battery on a tongue, mold threaded through. Sure, but not the headline. Halfway down the hall, he stopped. Hold up. My body recognized his tone before my brain did. I felt the small muscle under my eye start its private idiot tick. He raised his light at the nearest door's wired window. Two figures stood in the reflection, me and Dan, except my reflected face wasn't moving. Not the eyelids, not the throat. When I lifted my hand slow to prove something stupid to myself, the woman in the glass stayed very still and watched me with interest. Dan's reflection tilted its head like a dog hearing a new word. Dan had not moved. We backed up in even steps. The figures in the next two windows pressed their palms to the glass with a soft, thick thud. Our hands stayed where we'd put them. In the third window, my reflected mouth twitched up, small and private, at something no one had said. We took the stairwell door at a trot that didn't look like fleeing, because pride is a habit you can do in PPE. The stairwell breathed cold. Every landing had a wired glass window. Every window had a face pressed to it. Some of those faces were ours, multiplied and scaled wrong like a child's collage. Some belonged to people I knew and didn't. Tamsin, the barefoot man, a boy who died in July with a pit bull whining at the curb. Every face wore an expression slightly out of time. On the third landing, a mouth opened, as if to ask me to hold something. I did not stop. The basement door stuck and then took offense. We slipped through into air that tasted like burned sugar and batteries. Mirrors lined the walls, standing, leaning, stacked in a jittery circle like teeth. Some wore ornate frames with the silver gone to cloud at the edges. Some were cheap rectangles with the safety film bubbled. Some were wardrobe doors that remembered shoulders. They faced inward, angled to catch a center point. Something stood at that point. I wish I could tell you it looked like a man. It didn't. It looked like the part of a mirror that refuses to be glass. A tall, narrow disobedience. Faces skinned across it. A deck riffling. Mine, Dan's, Tamsin's, the barefoot man's, the college kid. The mouth of each face was wrong. When mine surfaced, she smiled too soon. The mirrors in the circle shivered delicately, a dog's ears at a whistle. The thing lifted an arm and pointed. Its arm didn't have joints. It simply bent. We ran. There are choices you get to congratulate yourself for later. This wasn't one. This was the body choosing self over pride, and I led it back up the stairs between windows that tried to be eyes, through the lobby, over the tongue of the door, into night with our lungs on fire. In the passenger mirror of the rig, Dan's reflection smiled when he didn't. In the driver's side mirror, the version of me there breathed easier than I did, like she'd already finished something important and wouldn't share. We didn't file a report. You can't write something wore my face and tested the grin in the same field where you enter transported without incident. We didn't tell the charge nurse, or the cops we like, or each other. Not really. We did what night people do, rearranged small habits and pretended that was control. I taped a rag over the microwave door at the station. I put gaffer's tape over the shiny logo on my watch. Dan stopped wearing mirrored sunglasses. He turned the bathroom mirror to face the wall, like he was disciplining a child. We learned to look down, For a week, the town let us get away with it. Then we got sent to a domestic 2 blocks from the hill. The woman met us on the sidewalk, hugging herself so tightly, her sternum might have hung. "He won't stop smiling," she said, as if describing a small leak. "He won't stop." Her husband stood in the kitchen with his back to us, facing the sliding glass door. His reflection in it, narrower, slicker, grinned at him. His jaw shook with the effort of not matching. I walked sideways so he had to look at me, not the glass. "Hey," I said, "that tone you learn for men who are losing to an enemy you can't tackle. Look at my nose, not past me, at me." He tried. He accidentally caught the stainless of the fridge. He smiled so hard I thought his lips would rip. We covered the door with a blanket on our way out. We got him to the rig without letting him glance in the rear window. We buckled him and breathed with him until his body remembered the trick, the way a drowned man remembers swimming. He calmed. My hand shook only afterward, when I had no more job to do. That night, because apparently I don't like myself, I drove past Ashford with the windows up and the radio off. Air from the hill tasted like pennies and old rain. The black windows shone like eyes that had learned not to blink. I parked at the bottom of the fence line and looked straight at the ground, and still somehow knew the front door lay on its side, with its hinges still trying to finish their last argument. Back home at 3, my bathroom sink turned on by itself to a thread. In the mirror above it, condensation bloomed, where a face would be if I stood there. Letters followed, traced by a finger from the other side. "Don't let the windows see me." The apostrophe was missing, like a small politeness left out in a hurry. I turned the tap off so slowly, the mirror didn't think I was refusing. I hung a towel over it and slept badly on top of the covers. For 6 days we stayed polite, and the town walked past the hill with its eyes on its shoes. Then Dan texted me a photo of his bathroom mirror, papered over with brown packing tape. "Good," I replied, and meant it. He sent a second photo. The paper had puffed inward like something behind it had exhaled. He wrote, "Ha." I wrote back a list. "No joking. Keep lights off after midnight. Don't stand where screens can catch you." And he sent only, "K." He was late the next morning. He never texts when he's actually in trouble. He only texts jokes. I went to his building and knocked the rhythm that means, "Hey, it's me." He opened the door on the chain. He looked present and not. He asked, "Do I look weird?" Like a child asking if a lie shows. "You look like a man who needs coffee," I said. He smiled by accident. The brass of the door kept the smile like a smear. I unhooked the chain without asking and went straight to the bathroom. The paper bowed like a sail, then flattened. I peeled a corner. In the fog trapped under the tape, someone had drawn a tidy grin with 2 neat teeth. We worked. We didn't go back to the hill together. We told ourselves that was restraint, when it was really fatigue. Tamsin started to blink again. She kept a sheet over her TV. She avoided the black of her phone screen when it was idle. When I caught her reflection in the microwave, it waved before she did. She laughed once, the sound a person makes when a joke touches bone. Then I did the thing no one had asked for. I went back to Ashford alone. I brought a face shield, not for droplets, for glass. I wrapped my phone in gaffer's tape so it would be a brick and not a lake. I wore a watch with a scratched plastic crystal that refused to reflect. I kept my light on the floor, except when the stairs demanded respect. I talked to the building because I am the kind of person who talks to dogs, cars, and rooms. "Just me," I said, stepping over the door's tongue. "Small business." The stairwell windows were empty. That was worse somehow. The basement door yielded like a tooth you shouldn't have wiggled. Down there the circle remained, but with a gap in the far wall where mirrors had been. Someone had moved them. Where? Who sells old mirrors by the pound? Why did the thought of them standing in somebody's antique booth make my stomach go hard? The center held the tall wrongness. Faces slid across it like cards. I saw mine older by 30 years. Mouth careful, eyes practical. I saw Dan trying not to grin. I saw Tamsin, hair unbrushed, furious at being looked at. The thing rotated its faces with patience. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Hey, I said, because if you're going to be foolish, be polite. You don't get them, you hear me? You don't get my people. The mirrors shivered. The thing tilted. Behind me, at the door, something at floor height dragged one not hand across the threshold. The glass nearest the door leaned in, as if to listen. I stepped around the circle, away from the center. I put both palms against the nearest mirror. The glass was cool, then cold, then warm, the way a hand finds your temperature and tries to keep it. I talked to it the way I talk to a patient's child. Your job is to give people back what the day takes. Haircuts, ties, lipstick, who we are when we have to leave the house. Not this, not doors. The mirror hummed, old TV hum, the kind I could hear as a kid even when my parents thought the set was off. The surface steadied. The woman in the glass matched my breath again, not ahead of me, not with a borrowed mouth. I moved to the next mirror. Palms, talk, third, fourth. The oval with the ornate frame was most stubborn. It kept trying to paste Dan's mouth on my face. I pressed until my wrists ached and told it the list of what my hands have fixed. A kid choking on a grape, a bleeding man lowered gently so his mother wouldn't hear him hit, a prom dress hemmed over a bathtub while someone cried into a towel because she wanted to look like herself and not the idea she'd bought. The oval warmed and yielded my face back to me. I didn't finish the circle. Holiness is above my pay grade, but I spoke to enough surfaces that the room changed shape. The pressure eased, the way a bar quiets when one voice starts a story everyone needs to hear. The thing in the center dragged my face up again and made it grin like it knew something final. I didn't let it keep the moment. I turned my back on it. Movies tell you never to do that. Movies were filmed by people who adore looking. I faced the circle instead. You know your job, I told the glass. Do that. If something tells you you're a door, make it say please. If it can't, be a wall. The shape by the door skittered out. The wrongness at the center hissed. A sound like air abandoning a room. I left before the building remembered my name. I won't pretend I cured anything. People still come in shaking from the hill. The town pulls dumped mirrors out of the ravine like fish and stacks them at the transfer station. Thrift stores have stopped pretending they ever get decent wardrobe doors. Tamsin keeps a sheet over her TV and a hand over the camera on her laptop, and when her reflection waves first, she waves back, small, as if humoring an anxious child. Dan took the paper off his mirror and texted me a picture of a blank tile wall, with the caption it blinked first. I've stopped lecturing my friends. I talk to surfaces instead. I cover the bathroom mirror after midnight. I keep the rig side mirrors aimed at the ground, unless I'm merging, and when I must look, I say aloud, give me what I need, not what you want. The black of my phone screen shows only my thumbprint smears. If it ever shows my mouth when my mouth isn't doing anything, I put it face down. Some mornings, I forget to uncover the mirror on my dresser before I leave for shift. I come home, and the towel is slightly askew, lifted by a finger width. I smooth it flat. The glass feels cool under the cotton, as if someone on the other side is learning manners. I tell it the names of the people who need it. Kids with bobby pins in their teeth, old men trying to tie a tie again after a funeral, a woman who wants to see whether her hands make her look like her mother's hands yet. I tell it they matter more than whatever the hill thinks it is owed. When night presses its mouth to the window and asks for a smile, I let it fog the glass. The fog outlines an oval. I don't trace it. I stand there with my hands open, and when the fog clears and the glass remembers the streetlight and the opposite brick and my face, I say good, because sometimes approval is the only prayer that does any work. If you ask me whether Ashford is haunted, I'll say it's habitual. The town looked at the hill for too long, and the hill learned to look back. Mirrors are obedient. They were happy to help. The trick isn't to destroy them, it's to give them better instructions. We still carry people out who can't stop smiling. We still cover sliding doors with blankets on our way past. We still breathe with men until their chests remember to lift by themselves. On a good night, you can watch someone glance at a black surface and then decide not to, and that tiny act of refusal feels like a hinge choosing to stay a hinge. On a bad night, I wake and the bathroom sink is running again, a slender thread like a vein. The towel over the mirror has slipped. In the corner of the damp glass, two careful teeth appear in a neat little grin. I wipe them away with the side of my hand and go back to bed. In the morning, the glass shows me as I am, sleep-creased, competent, uninteresting, alive. I run a thumb along the line of my jaw in the reflection, and the woman there matches me, on time without expectation. The window behind her shows the river and a cloud. No extra faces, no borrowed smiles. If the hill wants more than that, it can wait for another town to forget a building. We're busy. We have real people to look after. Now, on to the next story. The crackling of twigs beneath my boots was the only sound breaking the hush of the forest. It was that hour when the light hasn't quite given up, but every color feels drained, as if the world is holding its breath. I've always loved solo camping, the ritual of it, the honesty, but that evening, the trees were different. They leaned in, their dark fingers reached and tangled overhead, and what little sky remained seemed far away, the way a ceiling feels when you're feverish. I told myself I was being dramatic. Too many nights working late, too many city horns and sirens still rattling the edges of my thoughts. I paused and let my backpack settle against my spine. One more mile, maybe two, and I'd find a clearing, a small fire, tea, silence that didn't feel like it was listening. Beautiful evening for a hike, isn't it? I hadn't heard him approach. A man stood half a dozen paces off the trail, tall and lean, the kind of lean that comes from using your body more than feeding it. His coat was canvas, sun-faded and neatly patched. His face was weathered in the way of people who stand in real weather for real reasons. Everything about him felt ordinary, except his eyes. They were bright, sharp, and endlessly curious, as if I was a puzzle with only one piece missing. "Yeah," I said, steadying my breath, just trying to find a spot before dark. "You're in luck," he said, with the kind of cheer that felt rehearsed. "There's a perfect clearing just up ahead. You won't find a better one before night takes the trail. Come on, it's not far." Every instinct I had put its hands on my shoulders and leaned backward. I almost said I preferred to camp alone, that I had a map, that I was fine. But sunset was stealing the path one shadow at a time, and I was tired. I nodded and fell into step beside him. He knew the woods. He pointed to a thistle under an alder leaf and called it by a name I didn't know. He tapped a cluster of stones and said there had been a stream here once, years ago, before a storm rearranged the hillside. He knew where birds nested and what the wind meant when it ran cold. His knowledge should have comforted me. It almost did. "What brings you out here alone?" he asked, glancing back with that mild, affable smile. "City gets loud." "Sometimes," I said. "Needed the quiet." He nodded thoughtfully. "Quiet is honest out here. The woods have a way of keeping you." The way he said keeping made the hair on my arms rise, as if the word had a second meaning he was tasting. We stepped into the clearing as the last light failed. It was, as promised, perfect, flat ground, a ring of stones darkened by old ash, a fallen log at the edge for sitting. I let my pack slip to the dirt and rolled my shoulders. "This is great," I said. "Thanks." "Oh, it's my pleasure." He didn't leave. "Let me help you set up. It'll be dark soon. 4 hands beat 2. "That's okay," I said. Suddenly aware of how alone we were, "I've got a system." "Nonsense." He crouched and started pulling out tent poles as if they were his. "Wouldn't want you fumbling around in the dark." I hesitated. It felt ruder to argue than to let him help, so I didn't. We worked in a rhythm that was almost comfortable, except for the way his eyes kept flicking to the tree line as if he expected the forest to answer a question neither of us had asked. He would ask me something quick and personal. "Do you live alone? Do you have family who know where you are?" And then before I could reply, he would change the subject. Plants, weather, rivers, as if the questions weren't his, but the interruptions were. The tent rose, the sky fell. We finished by moonlight. The clearing, spare and tidy, began to feel like a stage with no audience. I stood and stretched. "Well," I said, making it a dismissal, "I appreciate the help. I'll be fine from here." He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough to feel present in the air. "You've done well," he said, voice lowered, "but there's still so much to do before the night is through." My chest tightened. "You should probably get back," I said gently, "before it gets too dark to find your own camp." He tilted his head, and that small, harmless smile bent the wrong way. "Oh, I am exactly where I need to be. You see, these woods, they get hungry, and it's been so long since we've had a visitor." I took a step back. Somewhere, an owl made a single sound and then thought better of it. I considered the tent. My phone was inside, along with the illusion of safety, and he saw me consider it. He positioned himself without seeming to, just enough to place his body between me and the zippered flap. "Let's not be rash," he said, hands raised in a friendly gesture that only made my heart beat harder. "The night is young. We have so much to discuss." "I don't want trouble," I said. "We can go our separate ways." "But trouble already found you," he said softly. "It was waiting the moment you stepped off the road and onto the old path. Did you not feel it? The way the branches leaned in to listen? The way the quiet thickened in your throat? You've been on the wrong trail since you chose it." I turned to run. He moved faster than he looked capable of, catching my wrist with a grip that was dry and strong as a root. I stumbled, the ground coming up too quickly, the smell of old leaves in my mouth. "Please," I said, airless with panic. "I won't tell anyone. I'll go back tonight." "The forest chose you," he murmured, and something in his voice uncoiled from very far away. "And now you will keep it fed." The trees around the clearing shifted, not in a wind. I would have felt wind. It was more like the woods were settling deeper into themselves, drawing nearer, their shadows thickening until they seemed almost human. At the edge of my vision, something darker than dark flickered between trunks and vanished. I forced my hand free. It was clumsy and desperate. My fingers closed around a broken branch, heavier than it looked, and I swung. The sound surprised me. Wood on bone, a dry knock. He reeled back, not in pain, but with the baffled expression of someone unaccustomed to being interrupted. It was enough. I ran. Branches whipped my face. The trail disappeared. There was only forward, then left, then anywhere that wasn't where I had been. Behind me, the man's voice rose and fell, never quite shouting, always near enough to hear. The trees overlapped, the ground tilted and slid in ways that didn't match how hills should behave. I ran until my breath became a knife and then farther. When I finally stopped, it was because my legs decided without me. I leaned against a trunk and tried to swallow my heartbeat. The moon had climbed, and its light lay shattered on the leaves. I listened for his steps, his voice, the crisp, casual questions he seemed to ask for somebody else. Nothing, just the layered quiet that lives in very old places. Then a twig spoke behind my left shoulder, very softly, footsteps, deliberate and patient. He wasn't calling anymore. He didn't need to. I pressed myself against the bark. I became smaller than myself. He would pass me. He had to. And I could turn and move and turn again, until the trees forgot who I was. A hand clamped over my mouth. I tried to scream. The sound became a small, helpless noise in my throat. The hand was strong and reassuring in a way that made no sense. Shh, a voice breathed in my ear, very close and very calm. I'm trying to help you. It wasn't his voice. It was a woman's, quiet as water on stone. The hand loosened, but didn't leave. I turned my eyes without turning my head and saw a face near mine, pale in the moonlight, hair pulled back so it wouldn't catch on branches. There was a smudge of ash on her cheek, and her expression was alert, not afraid. Can you walk silently? She whispered. I nodded. She removed her hand and took my wrist this time, the way someone might guide a sleepwalker. We slid between trees like thoughts slipping between words. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't say it would be all right. Silence was the kindest thing she could have offered. We moved for a long time. The woods opened and closed. Once she stopped and crouched, palm pressed to the earth as if listening. She changed direction without explaining why, and I followed because explanation was a luxury and trust was oxygen. At last the trees parted in a thin oval, a clearing no wider than a small room. Symbols had been cut into the bark of the surrounding trunks, clean and careful, the grooves dark like old writing. In the center stood a stone broad and flat as a table, its surface carved with meandering lines that caught the moon and held it. What is this place? I whispered because whispering felt required, as if the clearing had rules even words had to obey. The heart, she said, and the tether. She stepped into the moonlight and looked older than her face. He is bound to the woods. He draws from them and feeds them in turn. That's how he's lived this long. That's how he knew you'd come. She looked at me without pity. People think the trail is theirs because they walk it. They don't ask who laid it down. How do you know this? I asked. Her mouth tightened, not quite a smile, because I tried to leave once. A sound reached us, soft, like breath over a bottle's mouth. He was moving somewhere just beyond the carved trees. The woman put her fingers on my arm, not to comfort, but to steady us both. The bond works both ways, she said. Break the stone, break his shape, for a time anyway. Long enough to get you past the edge where the road still remembers itself. For a time, I repeated. The wind, which hadn't been there a moment ago, turned the leaves over in unison, so their pale undersides showed. Nothing is ever gone, she said, just moved. We don't have to outrun forever, just tonight. The clearing breathed. The man stepped between two marked trunks and smiled the way a family man smiles at a small child, kindly, keenly, already certain of the outcome. There you are, he said to the woman. I wondered how long you'd hold out before bringing her here. You always were practical. She didn't answer. She moved to stand between him and the stone, and in the moonlight, I saw that what I'd taken for bracelets on her wrists were thin, silvered scars. The old lines are wearing thin, he went on, conversational in a way that felt obscene. We haven't had a proper guest in months. I was beginning to think the trail had forgotten its manners. She isn't yours, the woman said. He laughed softly. If she stands here, she is already ours. He stepped forward. She stepped with him. Their bodies met like opposing currents. No flourish, no stalling, just sudden strength against strength that looked wrong, coming from such ordinary frames. He was stronger. It showed in the small ways, the way her feet slid a fraction, and his didn't, the way his smile did not change. But she knew how to counter what he was, how to angle elbows and hips to spoil leverage. They struggled without sound. Don't let him touch the stone, she said without looking at me. I moved, not quickly and not bravely, just inevitably, because some moments choose you. A shard of rock lay at the base of the flat stone, where a corner had once broken. I picked it up and felt it bite my palm. The markings swam under the moon, lines overlapping lines in a language that had never been meant for mouths. The man saw me. Something shifted in his face, like surprise learning the shape of anger. He shoved the woman hard enough to send her to one knee and lunged, his hand outstretched toward the center of the carved lines. I brought the rock down with everything I had. The sound that came up out of the ground was not from any throat. The trees bowed without wind. The markings flared and darkened, and then seemed to detach from the stone entirely, rising into the air like smoke before tearing themselves into shreds that vanished as they fell. The man convulsed, not like a person in pain, but like a shape remembering it had never truly been a person to begin with. He reached for me and didn't reach. He was near and also very far away. His smile at last left his face. What replaced it was older and endlessly empty, and looking at it felt like standing on a cliff with no bottom beneath you. "Run," the woman said, already pulling me, already upright, as if she had rehearsed this ending for years. Now, the earth cracked in narrow, puzzling ways that swallowed nothing and opened nowhere. The forest's scream became something like silence again, then a roar, then silence. We ran, falling and catching, dodging branches I barely saw, stepping where she stepped because that was the only place the ground would agree to be ground. And then the trees ended. There was a ditch, then the stubborn geometry of a road. Its paint faded to the color of old teeth. A car's headlights carved the dark in half and squealed to a stop because two figures had appeared out of nowhere, with wild eyes and leaf-slashed hands. We tumbled into the back seat before the driver could decide to be afraid. The woman said an address I didn't recognize in a voice that allowed no argument, and the car obeyed. I turned to the window as if it were the last page of a book, and I wanted to read the final sentence twice. The forest had gone very still. A pale, unnatural mist unrolled from between the trees and spread across the ditch like a blanket someone was pulling up to someone's chin. For an instant, only that I saw a taller darkness inside the mist, the outline of a man unthreading itself, and I thought I heard him whisper my name as if he were trying to remember how it ended. We didn't speak until we were 2 towns away. The driver kept looking at us in the mirror and choosing, each time, not to ask. The woman's breathing gentled. Mine followed. By the time the car stopped, the horizon was beginning to pale in the east, and the wind smelled faintly of rain. She got out first and stood with the door open, waiting for me to follow. We stood together in the quiet of a street that had not yet decided to wake. "Will he?" I began. "Not tonight," she said, "and if you're careful, not soon." I wanted to ask 100 other questions. How long had she lived out there, learning the shape of his rules? How many others had made it to the stone with her? How many had not? But her face had settled into a calm I didn't want to break, and my body had begun to remember it was human and fragile and very tired. "If you ever go back," she said softly, "choose the new paths, the ones cut by hands you know. Old trails keep old promises." "I won't go back," I said. She smiled then, a real one, small and almost surprising. "We always say that." She closed the door and tapped the roof twice, and the car took me away. I never camped alone again. I never went far enough from streetlights to forget their names. I told myself the world was smaller than I had believed, and it helped until it didn't. Some nights, lying awake in that patient space before sleep, I hear a boot on dry leaves, and the old quiet leans in from the corners of the room. On those nights I count the walls, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I tell myself that a house is a promise with nails in it, and promises hold. Most nights it's enough, but sometimes, when the wind threads the alley just right, I swear I hear a man's voice outside my window, careful and friendly and endlessly curious, practicing my name like a song he knows he will get to finish at last. I hope you enjoyed that one. Now on to the next story. They say driving strangers is safe enough, but what if the stranger already knows everything about you? The streets were empty in that strange way only cities can manage. A place that roars with life in daylight, reduced at midnight to dark glass, shuttered doors, and the occasional hiss of a distant bus. My rideshare app pinged. Another pickup, Oakwood Avenue, 15 minutes, easy money. I'd been driving nights for months, and I liked it better than the day shifts. Fewer drunks, fewer kids with blasting music, fewer small talk conversations I had to fake, just long stretches of quiet and the occasional polite rider. Something about that night, though, felt off. Maybe it was the way the streetlights flickered as I pulled over, or maybe it was the man waiting for me. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat that looked too heavy for spring. A wide-brimmed fedora hid most of his face. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just opened the rear door and slid in like he'd been expected. "Evening," I said, forcing a lightness into my tone. "Oakwood Avenue, right?" He nodded once. His eyes caught mine in the rearview mirror, cold, measuring, like he was making notes I couldn't see. I pulled away from the curb, the car filled with silence, thicker than most rides. Normally I'd try small talk, but something about him told me not to. The tires hummed, the city unspooled in shades of gray. "You drive at night often?" he asked finally. His voice was low, gravelly, touched with an accent I couldn't place. "Yeah, few nights a week. Helps pay the bills," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "Must meet all sorts of interesting people." "Sometimes," I said, "mostly just folks trying to get home." He leaned forward slightly, and I could feel his eyes boring into the back of my head. "And you? What brings you into this line of work?" The way he said you made it sound like I was the first specimen in a long experiment. I forced a laugh. "Oh, flexible hours. Works with my schedule." "Your schedule," he repeated slowly, like he was rolling the word around on his tongue. "And what else does your schedule involve?" My hands tightened on the wheel. "Not much. Work, sleep, repeat." "Ordinary," he said, almost to himself. "So very ordinary." The silence that followed was worse than the questions. We drove deeper into the city's outskirts, where houses grew sparse and the roads narrowed. I didn't recognize the neighborhood. My GPS still showed the route to Oakwood Avenue, but the streets looked wrong, like they'd been rearranged. "Tell me about your family," he said suddenly. My blood ran cold. I hadn't mentioned family, ever. "I don't really have much family," I lied. "It's just me." "No," he said softly. "That's not true. Not what your profile says. There's a sister. Millbrook, isn't it? Lovely little town." My mouth went dry. My rideshare profile didn't list anything like that. Not my sister, not her town. My voice shook. "You must have me confused with someone else." His chuckle filled the car, low and mocking. "Oh, I don't think so, Sarah." The sound of my own name in his mouth made my heart skip. "How do you—" I began, but stopped. My instinct screamed, "Don't give him more. Keep driving," he said. The friendliness in his tone had been replaced by steel. "We're not finished yet." I flicked a glance in the mirror. He was watching me, his hand sliding inside his coat. My pulse spiked. I didn't want to know what he was reaching for. Without thinking, I slammed on the brakes. The car shrieked to a halt. The man lurched forward. I ripped my seatbelt loose, threw open the door, and bolted into the night. The street was unfamiliar. Houses crouched dark and silent. My shoes hammered pavement. Behind me, a car door slammed and footsteps followed. He was faster than I expected. His breathing never changed pace. Steady, relentless. I darted between two buildings, my lungs burning. The night smelled of asphalt and rust. My foot caught an uneven crack, and I went down hard, palms and knees scraping. Before I could scramble up, a hand clamped around my ankle. I kicked wildly, screaming, but his grip was iron. He dragged me back with terrifying ease. In the pale light, his face loomed above me for the first time. His grin was manic, his eyes bright with a predator's glee. Now, he said, mock gentle. "Running already?" We were having such a lovely conversation. I twisted, desperate. "What do you want from me?" He tilted his head, studying me like a puzzle. I want to play a game. From his coat, he pulled a knife, long, curved. It caught the moonlight. My stomach dropped. It's simple, he said, crouching beside me. I ask questions. You answer truthfully. For every lie, he let the knife gleam closer to my skin. There are consequences. What if I refuse? I whispered. His grip tightened painfully. That's not an option. The game has already begun. He smiled. First question, why did you really start driving at night? I froze. The truth was embarrassing, vulnerable, but lying felt worse. I was avoiding someone, I admitted. An ex, he wouldn't leave me alone. I thought working nights would make it harder for him to find me. The man's smile widened. Honesty suits you. Next question, what's your greatest fear? My breath shook. Being helpless, I whispered, losing control of my own life. His eyes glinted. Interesting. And right now, how in control do you feel? Tears stung my eyes. Why are you doing this? Who are you? He leaned closer, his knife tracing the air above my arm. I know everything about you, Sarah. Your hopes, your fears, even your little secrets you thought no one saw. And what I want, he smiled a smile that belonged in no human mouth, is to see if you're worth keeping. My heart thundered. I had seconds, maybe. His questions weren't a game. They were a ritual. The way his voice lingered on words, the way the knife gleamed, the way the night felt heavier with every truth. He was feeding something, drawing it out of me. But if he needed me alive to keep playing, then maybe, just maybe, I had a chance. When he leaned closer, I jerked my knee upward, slamming it into his chest. He staggered, grip loosening just enough. I shoved him back and scrambled to my feet, sprinting into the dark. This time I didn't look back. I ran blind until the houses thickened again, until a main road opened in front of me. Headlights cut through the dark. I stumbled into the street, waving frantically. A car screeched to a halt, horn blaring. I threw myself against the door, gasping, begging. The driver's face was a blur of confusion and alarm. Behind me, the street stretched empty. The man was gone. The police never found him. My app showed no record of that ride. No pickup, no destination. As if the passenger had never existed. I deleted the app that night and never drove again. But sometimes when I walk home late, I hear footsteps behind me. Slow, steady, measured. And when I glance over my shoulder, I catch the flash of a fedora brim in the corner of my vision. Gone before I can be sure. If you ever drive alone at night, remember this. Not every passenger is a stranger. Some are already waiting for you. Now, on to the next story. My grandfather used to pull the curtains at dusk like he was tucking the whole house into bed. He'd lick his thumb and pinch the pull cord, 2 quick tugs, and the fabric would hush down. No need to see what doesn't mean you well, he'd say without looking at me. The first time I asked what that meant, he told me the woods behind town weren't empty, not haunted, not sacred, just occupied. I laughed when I was small because words like that rolled off me. I didn't laugh at 17. At 17, you're too busy proving you're not afraid of anything to admit you aren't sure what fear is for. We called the stretch of old growth on the far side of the quarry the Hollow, though there's no map that says that. The main trail is wide enough for a four-wheeler and ends at a ramshackle hunting cabin. Teenagers swear has a secret basement. There are side paths, deer tracks, old logger cuts that lead nowhere and everywhere. You can walk there in daylight and feel like you've stepped into the wrong year. You can stand at the tree line at night and hear nothing at all. That kind of silence isn't peace, it's attention. The dare started at a bonfire nobody had permission for. Tyler Boone brought a truck bed of pallets and a case of beer he didn't pay for, and enough gasoline to make the flames think we liked them. Every kid in school showed up in thrifted flannel, and a scent that said it would be fine to regret this tomorrow. People kissed people they shouldn't. The smoke got in your hair, the way trouble gets in your plans. Somebody put a speaker in a cooler and the music sounded like it was drowning. I was on my second beer, warm and tinny, when Tyler's laugh came from my left like a slap. "Mason," he yelled, because he liked yelling my name more than using it properly. "You still scared of the hollow?" He had that look that meant he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted, or the night ran out of him. His friends leaned behind him like a set of choices I would regret either way. "It's just trees," I said. I wanted it to be a sentence that ended the conversation. It came out like a dare I had accidentally made to myself. "Then midnight hike," he said, almost kindly. "In and out before dawn. None of that I got lost crap. You go to the cabin, leave your mark, you come back, we'll keep the fire for you. Or admit you're chicken, and I'll stop asking you to do anything brave forever." He would not stop asking. If I said no, he'd carry that refusal like a trophy and show it to every stranger he could. If I said yes, the forest would accept my answer too. 17 doesn't model outcomes. 17 is a closed fist. "Fine," I said, and to my disgust, the cheers around us felt like a reward. "Bring him back a souvenir," someone added. "Bring a nail from the cabin." Somebody else shouted for me to take pictures. The night blinked slow. Tyler clapped my shoulder hard enough to make the bottle rattle in my hand. "We'll wait," he said, and if I had been a different person, I would have noticed he didn't say "we'll help." There are different kinds of dark. There's the kind that collects under porches and inside tires, the kind that belongs to a neighborhood and minds its business. There's the kind that falls like a curtain, heavy and respectful, when the sky is clear in October. And then there's the kind the hollow keeps on hand, a dark like a closed mouth. The trail swallowed my light, as if it were embarrassed for me. The pine needles underfoot gave without sound. I told myself every step that the woods were only trees at night, that the shapes my beam found were shapes I'd see in daylight and call by their names. The smell went wrong around the first bend. Damp and leaf sour is normal. Damp and something metallic and sweet is not. It caught behind my teeth and made my tongue feel heavy. I slowed without meaning to. My light found a trunk taller than the rest, a lightning strike down its center, years old and still raw looking. Someone, many someones, had carved into the bark, spirals that didn't quite close, hash marks intersecting lines that tried to be letters, and quit. Sap had bled from the cuts and run in black gloss that made my light behave. I touched one groove with 2 fingers because you can't help yourself around stories. The wood was warm like a human wrist. The crack behind me wasn't a twig snapping, it was the sound of pressure releasing. I spun with my light and found nothing but underbrush. But the leaves at shoulder height trembled the way a person does when they are trying not to cough. I told myself it was a raccoon. I told myself a lot of things that did not want me. The cabin showed up fast because the trail decided to be helpful. It sat in a small clearing like a tooth set wrong in a jaw. The roof bowed under moss and weather. The windows were rectangles of absence. Someone had hung a sign there once. The last 2 letters remained, a nailed-on IN that could have been an invitation or a warning. My light cut a square through dust and found nothing first, and then too much. The smell hit my mouth. Rot, certainly. Under that, iron. Under that, something like rain that has been waiting too long to fall. I stepped through the doorway because the night had left me no other door to argue with. The floor flexed. Carvings scored every log. The spirals and hash marks from the tree had been repeated here with a patience that wanted to be called worship. Some lines were new, bright, with resin still weeping. Some were old and dark and boarded over by newer cuts. The patterns didn't arrange themselves into anything you could be proud of deciphering. They wanted to be looked at long enough that looking became agreeing. At the far end, bolted to the floor, was a chair. You know the difference between a chair and a device, by the way. Your knees react. This had arms too tight and straps too worn and a back too tall. The wood around its feet had been darkened by something that wasn't varnish. There were scratches on the arms, shallow at first, deeper as you followed them, stopping in sudden gouges like someone had tried to argue with their own hands and lost. My light guttered. The batteries were new. My thumb tapped the casing anyway. The cone of light widened and thinned. My breath fogged in front of my face, in a space that was not cold enough for fog. I thought I heard a sound loud enough to name, and then the thought left me, as if a hand had gone into a drawer and removed it. When the whisper arrived, it didn't use ears. It squeezed from the inside of my skull. Stay. I didn't move. That was all I had to offer. If I moved, it would be me deciding. If I didn't, the cabin had to claim me itself. Hungry, said the pressure. The way you say please after you've been taught it stops being optional. The air thickened, a heavy cloth, damp and patient. The chair seemed to tilt, though it didn't. The straps dangled like lines offered to a drowning man. My light took its own advice and cut itself. The dark in the cabin was the wrong kind. It wanted things. Stay. We're hungry. I left my dignity in the threshold. I bolted, hitting the door frame with my shoulder, an old bruise planted like a flag. The night outside had the decency to be air, and when I gulped it, I thought I could taste dust and books and the kind of sunlight that makes you squint. My legs happened without me. Branches reached and found my jacket and wrote new shapes into it. The whisper followed, not in my head now, in my teeth. The vibration made my jaw ache. Don't leave. Don't run. You came to feed us. There is a point at which fear becomes work. You do what you have to. I kept the beam low to find roots and holes. I put one foot down and then the other like I had invented it. The trail split where it usually doesn't. I guessed wrong and found a ditch and ate a mouthful of leaf mold and old acorns. When I lifted my head, 3 figures stood where the light thought the path had been. They were not ghosts in any capital letter sense. They were bodies that had decided to keep being without remembering how. Tall, even with a stoop, draped in rags that had never been new. Their chests were patterned with cuts, spirals, crosshatches, still seeping with something dark and thick. Their faces didn't match faces as we used them. Features set too far apart, skin stretched wrong. Their mouths were large and all the wrong shapes. The eyes, what sat in the sockets, were not eyes. They were hollows, deep enough that what light I had seemed to go down and not come back. Hunger, said one, and the sound came from the opening that might have been a mouth, and from the ground under my hands, and from behind the trees in a harmonized insistence. The one to the left tilted its head the way a dog does when you've said something large and strange. The one to the right took a half step in unison with the others, as if the idea of movement were being shared among them like a song. My light, traitorous, tried to shake itself out of my hand. I scrambled backward, scuffing the wet earth with my heels. The whittled grooves in their skin caught the light like script. I had the stupid thought that they had tried to write something on themselves so the woods would remember their names. They were close enough that the wrong cold of them had a scent, wet wool and old pennies. I was not noble. I did not plan. The body wants up more than it wants any story about up. I ran again, cutting into brush too thick for paths and too honest for lies. The whisper thickened. It suggested a price and then another. The woods played fair by not lying about it. Bring another, and we let you go. I nearly fell off the ridge instead of finding it. One more step in the dark, and I would have introduced my bones to the ravine the way teenagers dare each other to. The slope dropped away in a black that did not reflect. Past it, over the shoulder of land, the town made a small, diligent glow. 3 street lamps and the gas station, and the window of the diner that pretends not to close. A dog barked, a sound so domestic it hurt. My thigh muscles told me they had their own ideas about the future. I went sideways along the ridge with both hands out, the way you do on ice. The whisper pressed. Another. Give us another. We let you go. The names that came into my head weren't random. Tyler raised himself from my memory, laughing with his hand on my shoulder like it was his. The boys who laughed with him, and the girls who chose not to look at me unless they could make a friend angry by it. All of them lined up like charitable donations. They're the easy thoughts. They humiliate you afterwards because you find you had them. No, I said to the dirt and the press of hunger, and to whatever had stolen good sense from my hands in the cabin. My voice sounded thin and young. The trees to my right shuddered like someone had dragged a coat through them. A pressure rose in the ground that felt like a held breath becoming the need for speech. The air kept its hands on my shoulders and tried to turn me the way you turn a child who is looking the wrong way. No, I said again. I don't know why I said it twice. Maybe because words repeated become doors. The woods answered the way they know how. The trunks leaned and then leaned back, not by much, by the width of a promise. The wind ran in and ran out again, like it had forgotten something. The whisper retreated into the roots and the layers of leaves. All that remained was the quiet that comes right before dawn, when even tired birds can't be bothered to complain. I did not feel like I had won anything. I felt like I had been allowed to take responsibility for my choice, and that I would be required to do it again. The tray line spits you back into town, the way a bad conversation does, abruptly, without apology, with bits of someone else still clinging to you, gravel underfoot. The single bulb on the pole behind the ball field insists on its job. The houses along that side street all share a porch light syndrome. On, off, on. I crossed the last patch of ditch and saw Sheriff Langley's cruiser roll slow by the diner, the way it always does when he can't sleep and pretends it's work. He saw me. He did not flash his lights or hit the siren. He pulled over where my path met the asphalt, and he left his window up and watched me walk to him. Evening, he said. It was morning. Evening, I said back. I was bleeding from the sleeve and did not care yet. I must have looked like the wrong answer to a question nobody had asked. Been in the hollow, he said, not asking. Yes, I said. It was either that or lie, and my mouth had no energy for anything with extra steps. He nodded once, as if I'd passed a test he did not approve of giving. Get home, he said. Clean up, eat something hot. Then he looked at my face the way people look at weather, and added, don't make any offerings for a bit. He meant don't leave food on your windowsill, don't put salt across your door, don't hang twine with knots in it from your porch. The old people do those things in spring and in November, and when a baby comes. The old people are not wrong, but when you've been in and the hollow has let you go, the woods respect other currencies. If you try to buy your way out again with rituals, you will feel the dark turn and weigh you for scales. I nodded because I understood him, and he gave me the courtesy of not driving me home. The hollow dislikes kindness when it's not invited to participate. My grandfather didn't lecture. He saw my jeans, shredded above the knee. He saw the sap and the mud and the marks on my forearms that would be purple by noon. He put the kettle on the stove and put the blue wash basin on the counter and set a clean towel beside it. He went to the bedroom and came back with an old jar of salve that smelled like pine and wintergreen and something older than both. He worked without talking, the way men of his generation do when they want to be certain you will hear them later. When the tea was cool enough to swallow, he said, well then, and I said yes, and that was the end of the first conversation. Sleep that day was a collection of small broken plates. I set them down, one at a time, and each one cut me. If I dreamed, the dream was made of pine pitch and the thump of something heavy against old floorboards. When I woke, it was because the house had settled, the way houses do, and I'd mistaken it for a footstep. The bonfire wasn't there when I went past the field that afternoon. The grass was bristled with black scars where pallets had been. The cooler lay on its side, and the speaker was gone, as if it had learned shame. At school on Monday, Tyler did not ask about my hike. He looked at me once, a quick assessment you give to things that might break, or might break you, and then decided he had other stories to tell. He laughed at lunch, and when he laughed, the hair on my arms tried to stand. I kept my sandwich in my hands until I remembered how to make my fingers believe bread had ever been safe. The hollow did not let me go. In daylight, nothing was different. The old woman who sells bait and bread at the gas station still weighed my gummy worms on the spring scale and called me sweetie. Mr. Patel at the hardware store still kept the nails I like in brown paper bags under the counter, so I'd have an excuse to talk to him about his daughter's scholarship. The quarry still reflected sky better than lakes do. But night changed shape. Night learned my name, the way the conductor on a train learns the regulars. From my bed, if I held my breath the right way, I could hear a hush that wasn't the refrigerator or the house or my lungs. It was listening all the way outdoors. It was the hollow deciding whether to ask politely. Sometimes it asked. A week later, just before dawn made the sky admit it owed me light, a whisper slid up through the floorboards under my bed and brought the smell of rain waiting in bark. Stay, it said, a suggestion, like a friend asking you to be late to school with them. Feed us. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like weather. I turned my face to the wall because my grandfather had taught me not to look at a thing that wanted my agreement. The whisper went away as easily as fog leaves glass when you put your hand on it. Sometimes it didn't ask. Twice in November, something knocked at the back door that wasn't Knuckles. Once the kitchen window fogged from the outside, and words wrote themselves in, letters too careful, come back. I wiped it with the heel of my hand. Pale grease from my palm made streaks I had to scrub later. The streaks smelled like sap. I told the sink I was tired of being polite to things that had not learned to be. The sheriff's advice held. Offerings would have been a language the hollow could pretend to misunderstand. So I did the other kind of ritual. I ate food with salt. I kept a nail in my pocket and a stone I'd warmed by the stove on my nightstand. I put my boots beside the bed, pointing toe out, so that if I had to move fast, I wouldn't put them on backwards, because fear makes fools, and fools run in dumb circles. I did not sit with my back to the window. I answered my grandfather when he spoke and made a point of saying his name because names keep people where they should be. Tyler didn't stop being Tyler. That's the trouble with boys like him. They don't know when they've been spared. They went to the hollow again 2 Fridays after my hike and came back smelling like lies. In third period on Monday, when the math teacher stepped out, he told a story about a raccoon and a bottle of cheap whiskey, and I watched the faces around me do the thing people do when they are relieved that danger can be made small and stupid with the right verbs. At lunch, he dared Jalen to go alone, and then when Jalen said nothing, he turned his head and found me with his mouth. "You've been," he said. "Tell him it's nothing." "It's not nothing," I said, and after I said it, there was a silence I could put my fist in. It lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Tyler grinned. "See?" he told the table. "He's messing with you. He went that night anyway, not alone. People like him don't enjoy their own company. He took 2 boys who wanted a story they could tell forever, and a girl who wanted to make somebody jealous, and a flashlight that worked until it didn't. I know because I followed them as far as the tree line, and then stopped where my grandfather's words became a hand at my collar. I watched their lights move like minnows in shallow water. I counted to 31, the number of boards on the bridge over the creek, the number of steps from our back door to the road, because numbers are a way of reminding yourself that some rules are made by you. The hollow took nothing that night. It let them laugh. It let them throw a bottle at a tree. It let them carve something ugly on the door of the cabin and leave the cheap Sharpie there like an apology. Then it sent them out with the feeling that they had been the cruelest people in the room and that the room had not minded. That's how it keeps you. It's patient as rust. It doesn't need to get lucky. It only needs you to get tired. The week before Thanksgiving, the town hung lights on Main Street, and the bakery put gingerbread in the window, and Sheriff Langley pulled me over on purpose to tell me the quarry road would be closed after dark. Brakes freeze, he said to the air between us. People forget how to use respect. He looked at my hands on the steering wheel and nodded, approving or not, I couldn't tell. Then he said, "You hearing anything at night?" And I said, "Sometimes." And he said, "Don't repeat it when you do." And we let that be prayer. The hollow changed the way I heard my grandfather breathe. He kept the curtain shut all the way down now, and put coins on the windowsill so that if anything pressed for entry, it would have to make a choice first. He didn't teach me which prayers he knew. He taught me the way to hold a door with your shoulder while your hands are full, so that the house learns you are willing to work. He taught me that when the kettle whistles, you take it off, even if you have to set it on the floor, because letting anything scream in a kitchen is an invitation to the wrong kind of visitor. On the coldest night of the year so far, when the breath in the barn looked like smoke and the cow's eyes made moons in the dark, I woke to a voice that had given up on whispering. "Hungry," said the floorboards. The window, my pillow. "Hungry," said the air. It wasn't asking for me. It was insisting on itself. I sat up slow because moving badly makes everything worse. The house was a person who had turned over in bed and not decided to get up. I thought of my grandfather's heartbeat next door, and of Tyler's laugh in the woods, and of the chair bolted to the floor, and of the spirals carved in bark and skin, and of the way the town lights look when you are almost home. I thought of my own mouth saying no, and of the way no had opened a door that did not lead where I wanted. "You can be hungry," I said into the room. "I can't feed you." It sounded stupid. It sounded brave. It felt like sand in my throat. "If you want me, you'll have to come here and tell me your name." The dark moved like it had misheard me. Then it left. I lay back down and stared at the line where the curtain didn't meet the wall because curtains never do. From somewhere at the edge of the field came the sound of something big, moving carefully. The cows did not complain. It took a long time for sleep to come, and when it did, it came like a truck from the wrong direction. In the morning there were prints in the thin frost between the porch and the old apple tree. Not prints like boots, not prints like deer. Long, narrow, the suggestion of toes but not the commitment, as if the feet that had made them had decided to keep some of their options. I stood over them with a mug of coffee too hot to drink and counted them backward until they reached the road and then stopped. The sheriff's cruiser rolled by, and Sheriff Langley slowed without seeming to. He looked at the tracks. He raised his eyebrows at me. Then he tipped his chin toward the tray line and drove on, because some conversations are best had at a distance. You want me to say I went back to the cabin and dug up the floor and solved something, or that I lured Tyler there and delivered him to whatever lives under bark until I felt righteous, or that I learned the woods have a king, and that if you cut a crown from his skull, the town will be safe for 100 years. It makes me a bad storyteller to tell you I did none of that. I carried a nail in my pocket and a rock on my table. I learned to hear when the hollow was asking and when it had decided to take. I said no, often enough that the word stopped tasting like fear and started tasting like bread. When spring came, my grandfather put seeds in the ground with the care of a man who knows plants are the other way the world bargains. Tyler left town for the oil fields and came back once in July for a funeral and left again without hugging his mother. The sheriff lost weight, and we pretended not to notice because we did not want to be the kind of town that takes more than it's owed. The cabin sat with its carvings and its straps and its chair, and I, who had learned to listen, could hear people laughing there and pretending it was clever. I still hear the hollow when the house goes quiet. It has learned my name the way I have learned to keep it. Some nights I lie awake and it places the idea of Tyler on my tongue like a communion I have not asked for. Some nights it says hungry and means something that isn't me at all. Some nights the whisper is almost a song, almost kind, almost the opposite of loneliness. Those are the nights that are hardest to refuse because hunger is more bribe than threat when you share it. If I am still telling this when I am my grandfather's age, I'll pull the curtains at dusk and say no need to see what doesn't mean you well, and the child who hears me will laugh because words like that roll off small shoulders. When they turn 17, they'll stop laughing and they'll go into the hollow because somebody will make a dare or because nobody will, and that's worse. Maybe they'll sit in the chair and maybe the chair will sit in them. Maybe they'll come back to the edge of the field before dawn and stand there shaking while the town makes its small, diligent glow. Maybe they'll hear the bargain and accept it and bring another, and then it will be my turn to say a name I don't want to say to a darkness that doesn't deserve it. Or maybe they'll say no twice and mean it, and the woods will lean back a fraction, and the dog 2 streets over will bark once like a punctuation mark and fall quiet, and the sheriff will drive by without stopping, and I'll make tea without letting the kettle scream. I can't tell you the ending because the hollow refuses endings. It runs on the kind of time that eats clocks. The best I can give you is this. There are nights I wake and the house has become a throat and something is speaking through it, and I put my hand flat on the wall and say my own name like a tool I trust, and somewhere in the trees something thinks about arguing and doesn't. There are mornings when the frost holds prints that decide to stop before the road. There are afternoons when the wind moves through pine, like the sound of someone choosing to leave. If you live here long enough, you learn the things that borrowed you, your temper, your pride, your worst idea of justice. You learn to put them down on the porch and go inside and pull the curtains and sit in a chair that is only a chair. You learn to eat hot food. You learn to be poor in the right ways. You learn the word no so well it starts to sound like yes to the people who want it to. And when the hollow presses its face to the window and breathes the word hungry, you answer like you would to weather. You say quietly, I heard you. Then you go on washing your hands, and when the water runs cold, you turn the tap the other way, and you don't look up to see your reflection blink first.